Alright, so check this out. Here's a quick backstory. I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me any proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. And to be honest, after a while, I also wasn't scared anymore since he almost never came close to me. Now, I know being stalked can affect people severely, even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I just got lucky and was never really psychologically affected by it. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts, such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to, or really tried to be honest, to catch him or identify him at all. About 3 weeks ago, I discovered the German version of r/I am a, and thought that people might want to know about what it's like to have a stalker. Since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think he'd ever see it. One person even asked, "Does he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit?" And I answered, maybe it would make him angry. Maybe he'd be turned on. I don't know, and I don't really care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it, and he didn't like it. Like I said, he was never aggressive or ever came too close to me. The closest that I know of was when he sent me a picture of myself unlocking my apartment door, taken from the corner of the steps above. I'm sorry if that makes no sense. I don't know how else to explain it. But I consider myself to be a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of actually being there to take a photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he did. I don't know how he got wind of the IMA, but he did. The next week was quiet, no letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then, he left me letters with printed out questions and my answers from the r/IMA thread. He also left me a long, hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue that I had posted on the German version of Am I the Asshole? Which is another subreddit where you ask the question, am I the asshole for doing this? His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later, I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or at my car like he usually did. No, this time he left it inside the apartment building, right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment, but I opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. Now, as I'm typing this out, I realized that wasn't a good idea at all, and it could have ended very badly for me. But luckily, he didn't send me a bomb or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, which is the kind you use to tape off walls when painting, nothing that you would use to restrain anyone, a TV remote with most of the buttons picked off, a pack of Band-Aids with a few used ones, which come to find out were not actually used, just made to look that way according to the police, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago and my boyfriend was next to me, but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumbled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and I gave it to them. They were more concerned this time, finally, thanks, and told me they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters or gifts for about another week and a half. But 8 days ago, it started again. I found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me and how I haven't been appreciating his effort, how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago, I left my apartment in the morning and heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He put broken glass under it in the middle of the night. I went off to work because I was in a hurry and was just going to make my boyfriend call the police, but then I found out that my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, the lights were smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on it. It said, "It's time soon, miss," and then my last name. I went back inside and called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time, they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just pissed at this point, which I made very clear. If, for some reason, you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, the letters, the gifts, the photos, even the damn glass under my doormat are really just annoying and inconvenient. But my car was useless to me now, and the threat scared even me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police said that they took the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't very high quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said weren't enough. And they told me that they'll look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. And then it was quiet for 2 more days. Until 2 days ago, someone rang the doorbell just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant, but I saw the blue lights outside, and just as I got up, I heard them shouting, "This is the police. Please open the door." They told us they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors who came home from his night shift about an hour earlier and heard someone else enter the building after them before the door fell shut. Now, by the way, my neighbors know of my situation, and I've asked them to make sure they don't let strangers into the building. This neighbor then went into his own apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion-activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor are only me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 in the morning. So he called the police. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. He should have been able to see the cop car since there's a little window up there and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or he wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbor, but he's finally done. For now, at least. He's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the last 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now, I finally got some peace. This writer has included an edit to add that I genuinely cannot stop thinking about it. Even today, at 9:30 p.m. for the first time in over a year, I took out the trash by myself in the dark. My boyfriend always did it just to be safe, but today, I had nothing to worry about. Thrifting is my favorite hobby, if you can call it that. It's something that I like to do alone when I get the time, as it's a chance for my brain to just shut off and let go as I scan aisles crammed with random things for hours. Now, I'm a 5'5" former elementary school teacher, and I'm about as intimidating as a wet sock, and I'm pretty quiet, and I stay to myself in public. I decided to go out of my way to a store that I hadn't been to before, and I followed my usual routine. When I'm in a store, it's just me and the items. I don't pay any mind to anyone around me, as the stores are crowded and I'm really only there to do my own thing. So imagine my surprise when an older woman turned to me and said in a huff, "Can I help you?" I turned and looked around to make sure that it was me who she was talking to. I just shook my head no and made a confused expression and went back to looking at shoes. Things were okay for a minute, before I heard her in the next aisle talking to her friend. She's saying, "Oh my god, this creepy woman is following me. Every time I look up, she's there." There was only so much space in the store, and I usually go along the edges and then make my way to the center of the store, so there's a good chance she probably just saw me doing my thing. I tried to avoid her until I realized she started talking to random people around me about how creepy I was and how I was stalking her. People started giving me funny looks, but paid no mind once they realized how harmless and shrimpy I look. They all said, her? Really?" And then laughed at her. I even heard that lady say, "Yeah, I'm gonna F her up if I see her again." She began making more and more aggressive comments, and I decided that I had had enough. I've never fought anyone in my life, and I wasn't planning to that day. I left my items and went to my car. Yeah, something was up with her, and I wasn't sticking around to find out what it was. So, to the actually creepy lady in the thrift store, let's not meet again. Last year, I was going out for drinks with my friends, but since I had to go to school the next day, I only stayed around until midnight or so. My boyfriend promised to pick me up and go home with me because I don't like to take the subway alone at night, but since I was pretty drunk by then, I took a little too long walking out of the pub. Unfortunately, we had to wait for the night bus, with multiple stops, since the subway closes on weekdays at night. Now, for some context, my boyfriend and I don't live together, but we do live very close to each other. It's about a 15 or 20-minute walking distance. Both areas are pretty shitty, and he lives near a train station with many crackheads, homeless, and just sketchy people around. And I live in a cheap, bad district with a high crime rate. My building has two entrances on two different streets because it's a corner building leading to a patio, and then to the apartment building and its doors. Now, to get into my apartment, I have to open 3 doors. I usually use the entrance door that's nearer to the subway and on my side of the apartment. We had to take 2 buses to get home. One drove us to the train station, and the next one from the train station to my apartment. After getting out of the first bus, we realized that we would have to wait for around 20 minutes or so for the second bus to come, and since I really had to sleep at home with class the next day, I didn't want to stay at his place. My boyfriend didn't want to wait, so he persuaded me to walk instead of taking the bus, which sober me would have never done. But since I was still drunk, I didn't care how we got home, so I agreed. We start walking home, and I passed a few sketchy people. Mostly they were just trying to sell drugs, but nothing really bad. Then I saw a guy walking in our direction, and I somehow got a bad feeling. So I told my boyfriend that I wanted to change to the other side of the street because I didn't want to walk past him. Suddenly, the guy yells out, "Hey," as if he wanted to ask us something, but we ignored it and continued to walk. He got louder and louder until he started to yell. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was coming over, so I whispered to my boyfriend, "Run." I took his hand, and we ran the fastest that I could while this guy started chasing us. We ran and ran and ran, and then made a turn to the right. This is the street where I live, and we hid. It seemed like he was gone, so I took my keys out and we started running towards my building, taking the other entrance of my building that I normally didn't use. As I was trying to open the door, my boyfriend started panicking, throwing me inside the patio and closing the door aggressively, and then pushing me into the building. He explained that the guy came running from the other side of the street, meaning he took a shortcut, probably thinking that we were going to run to the subway or the bus stops. If we had taken the other entrance, he would have clearly been the faster one. Being in shock, we unfortunately didn't call the police, which I regret. I stopped going out for drinks and clubbing for half a year after this, and I slept at my boyfriend's place for 2 weeks because I was scared that this guy would come back. I think the worst thing about this is that he really wanted to get us for whatever reason. I still want to know why he chased us for so long. 2 weeks later, a girl a few streets away was assaulted in front of her building by a guy who chased her home, and I wonder if it was the same guy or just a coincidence. One time, I was walking home from the train station after I spent the weekend at my aunt's house. It was about 11 at night and it was very dark outside. When I was almost home, I noticed a guy on crutches in front of me who walked in the same direction and then stopped every couple of meters to turn around and look at me before he continued to walk on. Since he was walking with a limp, I quickly passed him, and when I did, he stopped walking and grinned at me in this very creepy way. I kept moving since I lived in an apartment over a burger restaurant. For a moment, I considered to ask one of the employees to walk me to my front door, because to get to the entrance of the apartment part of the house, you had to walk around the house into a dark court. Finally, I, however, didn't ask because I thought, what could possibly happen? This guy's on crutches, and I didn't want to come across as childish. So I was walking through the court of our house and I wanted to pull out my keys while I was walking. Suddenly, I couldn't find them in my handbag, and I realized I had thrown them somewhere in my travel bag because I didn't want to lose them from my handbag while staying at my aunt's and being with her all the time. So, still standing in the middle of the court, I had to search my whole travel bag for the damn key. I was so distracted by the whole key searching incident that I totally forgot about the creepy guy that I had encountered before. When I finally pulled the key out of the bag, I looked up and the creepy guy from before was standing right in front of me, still grinning. I always thought that in a situation like this that I would just start screaming, but instead, I couldn't get myself to make any sound at all. With the keys in my hand, I started running to the front door. I opened it and I jumped inside the house. The guy, still walking with a limp, followed me as fast as he could. Luckily, due to his injury, he wasn't as fast as me. Unfortunately for me, though, our front door was one of those doors that slowly fell into the lock automatically, but when you try to push them in order to shut them quicker, it pressures back and it stops you from slamming it. So there I was, trying to push the door into the lock, while this creepy guy was on his way to follow me into the house. Believe it or not, the door fell into the lock right at the second that he reached the doorstep. Through the glass door, we looked at each other, both breathing heavily from the race, and he looked quite disappointed. I quickly ran upstairs to my apartment and I locked myself in it. Later that night, I looked outside my window and I saw that same man walking up and down the road in front of the house. He stayed there for about 3 or 4 hours after the incident. I can't tell you what it was that made me not call the cops. I guess I was like, after all, nothing happened. What can they even do? After that, I didn't feel safe in my home anymore, because I knew that he knew where I lived. I only left my apartment when being picked up or dropped off, and I made sure to be home before it was turning dark every day for the next 2 weeks. Finally, I decided to go to the police and tell them about it to ask whether they can keep a special eye on the neighborhood just for a little bit. I went to the police station and it happened exactly how I feared. They took notes and they said, well, we can't really do anything about it now. You should have called before, but we'll make a note. Well, a couple of days passed and suddenly I get a call back from another police officer who asks me a lot of questions about what happened that night. He then tells me that they've been looking for the guy on crutches for months already, because he's assaulted several other girls in our town, followed them into their apartments, and even slept in front of their doors. He had been in police custody before, got out, and violated probation. He had some kind of mental illness as well. The police officer told me to immediately call if the guy ever shows up again. He luckily never did. It was only then that I understood the seriousness of the situation and realized that I most likely escaped an attempted assault in some sort of way by literally a few inches. I, in a way, really didn't believe myself that the whole thing had actually happened before the police guy called me back. This was 5 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time, and it still gives me the creeps. So hey, creepy guy, let's never meet again. To give you some context, this happened on October 1st, 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. I was 17 at the time, and I had just left Île-de-France, near Paris, for a provincial town to continue my studies. As a student, 4 hours by train from my parents, I obviously decided to take an apartment, but the prices were unaffordable for me, so I settled in a brand new student residence. It's in the heart of a rich and bourgeois residential pavilion, contrasting with my small student residence. Everything is fine. I normally go to school, but right from the beginning, the teachers tell us that unlike students in other disciplines, we'll have lessons in presence and not at a distance, so we'll be the only ones to animate this part of the campus. In short, the first classes are going pretty well. Even though I have trouble fitting in like the others because of the masks, there's also a black shadow. On Thursdays and Fridays, I finish at 8 p.m., which makes me return to my little house around 8:45. It's the time to wait for the tramway that didn't pass often during the pandemic and make the 3 stops before walking 10 minutes to my home. As you understood, I was alone on my way to school, but in the week of September 21st to the 27th, when I went to class in the morning, I strangely met a man 3 times dressed in black, wearing a hood and whose face I couldn't really distinguish. What bothered me at this time was the fact that it didn't fit in with this neighborhood's, chic environment, but I wasn't focusing on that anymore. Finally arrives the night of October 1st. As usual, I leave school, but unlike the other days, I take the tramway about 1 hour later. I finally made a friend with whom I discussed the time of his bus. And as usual, I wait alone, and once in the tramway, I realize that just at the stop there is nobody there except for the driver and for me. So I decided to sit in the 4-seat squares to make myself a little more comfortable. At the next stop, which is still in the campus area, as I turn my head before the doors automatically close, my eyes cross that of a man sitting alone in black. And in half a second, the man blocks the doors that were closing, and he enters. While the tramway is empty, he sits in front of me. Intimidated and understanding that the situation is very suspicious, I look away. I prefer to look out the window. The more time passes, the more my instinct leads me to believe that this man may have some bad intentions. In my head, I begin to develop a plan to ensure that the person doesn't follow me when I have to go down. Once the tram arrives at my destination, I decide to leave at the last moment, right before the tram door closes. As I start walking, I hear a cry and I turn my head. I see the man who managed to get out and obviously pinched his fingers blocking the doors. The man then begins to walk behind me. This time, I'm sure I'm being followed. As I accelerate my pace, I hear the man do the same. I can even hear his breathing coming closer. Then it came to me to pretend to be on the phone to scare him. That worked, at first, And indeed, when the man turned around, my phone rang. I later learned that this was my friend who just wanted to tell me that he had the wrong bus. I was sure he heard the bell and therefore understood the deception. I turn around and I see the man slip something in his hand. I can't tell what it is because it's dark. Now the man starts screaming and running after me. While I'm out of breath, I rush into a crossing into a neighbor. I throw myself in his arms and I shout out loud, "Great, you came to get me." At these words, my neighbor immediately understood the situation and returned with me to my residence. Before that, I turned one last time and nothing. The man had disappeared. Once I'm in my room crying, I think back to this man's walk, and bingo, it looks like the person I met earlier that week. I decide the next day to make a statement. During the day, I was called to tell myself that the surveillance videos of the tram had revealed the identity of the person. He was a wanted man for sexual assault and armed robbery. Apparently, he found pleasure in assaulting rich girls to humiliate them before stealing them. That's why he prowled in my neighborhood. It made my blood run cold, and I decided to go home to my parents. Apparently, the man was found 2 weeks later in another city for assaulting a young girl in a store. The moral of the story is pay attention to yourself, especially at night. And above all, nothing is better than to follow your instincts. Still today, we talk about it with my neighbor. And even if the story ends well, it's developed me to have some kind of distrust. I remain on my guard, especially when it comes to meeting people with hoodies, and now I keep a pepper spray in my bag. If you liked these stories, then tap the video on the screen to hear more. Alright, so check this out. I'm not sure if I'm hyper aware or paranoid, but I've had several weird things happen recently and hearing so many others with similar stories too. First, several months ago, I was in a shopping center and a man walking towards me on the sidewalk said, "Hey, you dropped something." I looked him in the eye, but I kept walking. I knew that I hadn't dropped anything. Then about 30 minutes later, I went downtown. It's just a few minutes drive from where I was before. And I was walking in a busy area with a lot of restaurants, and another man said and did the exact same thing, only this time he was aggressive about it and rude, yelling at me for not giving him a response. Well, the second weird encounter was while walking my dog on a grassy area behind my apartment. The city owns the land, however, I've never seen people walk around there. As I was walking out of a little wooded area there, my dog abruptly turns around and barks at a man that he notices. He acted very surprised when I turned around, and my initial thought was that he was following me. He asked me if I had seen a cat, and then he laughed. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that he was nervous, but I still felt weird for days after. Who laughs when they're missing their pet though, you know? Anyway, the last encounter was in my office space that I rent. I have neighbors in the building, and specifically a new one was interacting with me. He came to my door and knocked on it and started to tell me about himself. He told me he doesn't have any friends in the building, and neither do I because, I'm there for work. Our conversation was pleasant, but then he said, "I asked Charlie which car you drive. I never get to see you here and I was just wondering." He asked for my contact for my business, and I was reluctant between giving my email or my phone number. He acted so frustrated and said just give me one or give me a card. Honestly, I was nervous and just blurted it out in hopes that I'd never have to see him again. When I didn't respond to a message from him a few days later, he came back to my office while I was with a client. He slipped notes through the door, and I decided to tell him politely that I was too busy and not accepting new clients. The friends that I've talked to say just to keep trusting my gut and to keep my distance. I don't leave my office without walking with someone or calling someone now, and I'm just tired of being on edge. This happened a few years ago. We had just moved to a new city, and I was about 11 at the time. There weren't any bus routes that came near where I lived, so my mom had to pick me up from school every day and take me in the mornings. But for this specific scenario, my mom didn't want to have to drive all the way to the school to get me because it was too busy with other parents picking up their kids, so she wanted me to walk to a local gas station and wait for her to pick me up from there. And we did this for a little while. And one of those times, I was waiting out front of the gas station, waiting for my mom to come and get me. I never really felt safe there, so I always stood with my back against the wall and watched the people while they got gas. Most of the time, nobody ever bothered me. They had places to be. But one time, this adult man walked up to me and asked if I wanted a ride home. I was so surprised and scared that he had come up to me that I didn't even hear what he said. So I, wanting to be polite, I laughed and nodded. And then he looked really pleased and started motioning for me to come with him back to his car. At this point, I realized what he had asked me, and I was getting really nervous because I didn't want to suddenly change my mind and tell him no, that I didn't really want to go with him. He noticed that I wasn't following, and he told me to hurry up and come along. I told him that I didn't actually want to, and I'd be okay because my mom should be here any minute. And then he started to argue with me and tell me that it was no trouble and that I really should go with him because I'd get home much faster. He even tried to tell me that if I went, he'd stop and get me something to eat on the way home. I tried really hard to tell him that I didn't want to go, but he kept insisting and he was starting to get closer. I didn't know if I should run inside the store or not, but I was too scared to go anywhere. Thankfully, before he could get too close to me, I saw my mom's car parked on the street where she usually waited. I didn't know how long she had been there, but I told him that that was my mom, and then I ran to her car and I got in. I told her what happened, and she told me that it was good that I didn't go with him, and that next time I should go into the store if anybody bugs me like that. I remember seeing him get into his van while we were driving away, but I never saw him again. Although about a week later, a kid from my school did get into a van with someone and they went missing for a few days. When they found them, they had been assaulted and dumped on the side of the road somewhere, thankfully still alive. All I could think about is that it must have been the same guy, and that could have been me. I'm a 15-year-old male, and yesterday I was on a bike ride at my local park when this dude in a shiny red Jeep Wrangler pulls up next to me and asks me for directions. The conversation transcript is as follows. He says, "Hey, do you know how to get to Darby from here?" I said, "Oh yeah, just go down this road and turn right at the gas station, or..." As I point in the direction he comes from, I say, "Maybe it's that way. I'm not really sure. Sorry, I've lived here for like 6 years, but I'm terrible with directions." The man says, "It's just that my GPS is broken. Where are you from?" This is the point where I'm getting kind of creeped out. This dude's tone, his general vibes, they're just, off. I'm autistic, so I'm not very good at judging tone, but he's using the same voice that psychologists talk to you with during a panic attack. He's not asking for directions like a normal person. I don't know how to describe it, but the way he was looking at me made me really uncomfortable. Answering his question, I said, "Here?" He asked me, "What's your name?" I told him my name. He says his name is Dave, and I say, "Hey, it's nice to meet you, Dave." Dave says, "You're pretty cute." I just said thanks. He says, "Do you want to jump in and have some fun?" At this point, I'm starting to get back on my bike and go home because I'm getting really scared, but I'm trying not to show it because, geez, dude, I don't know if this dude has a gun with him or other dudes or sleeping darts or what, man. All I know is that he's in this big ass Jeep with tinted windows, and I don't like this situation. He says, "Do you want to stay and chat for a while?" I tell him no, thanks. It's almost dinner and my mom's probably waiting for me. Then I biked home, and when I got home, I waited for my mom to finish up her phone call and I told her what had just happened. She called the police and, well, that about sums it up. I don't know, I'm just really jittery right now and I wanted to tell somebody. It doesn't help that I already have anxiety. I go to that park a lot and I know that a ton of Little League baseball games get hosted there. Plus, there's a kids' soccer camp there this time of year. I'm kind of freaked out and I really hope they catch whoever it was for the sake of the community. The police told me to call 911 if I ever saw that dude in that car again. So, for some background information, me and my friend are both reasonably scrawny teenage girls. We were camping and it was very foggy outside. It was like in the middle of the evening. So, my friend and I were hanging out at the beach, looking at all the sandcastles from the competition that took place earlier that day, and we had to use the bathroom and wash the sand off of our feet. So, she was washing her feet off and I was going to the bathroom, and I heard the distinct sound of keys jangling. Keep in mind, as I think that this is pretty important. So, after I got out of the bathroom, my friend was waiting for me just outside, and I asked if she had seen anyone leaving the bathroom, but she had just gotten there, apparently. We were just standing around when I heard the keys again. I looked up and I saw a man. He was in his mid to late 20s, early 30s at the latest. He had extremely greasy blonde hair, sunken eyes, a hoodie on with his hood up, and overall a pretty sketchy looking dude. He circled the bathrooms that my friend and I were standing by a few times, and he was always watching us whenever we were in view, which I took note of. My friend still didn't notice though. Anyway, a minute or two later, she asked me if I wanted to go sit at a picnic table with her, and I accepted because I wanted to get away from these bathrooms. So, we walked over to the table, but he followed us, and I know because of his keys. We sat at the table and she was talking to her boyfriend on Snapchat, and I was reading over her shoulder as I normally do. But while I was reading with her, I told her that the guy was watching us and about what I noticed before we went to the table. As I was telling her about that, I felt like I was being watched, so I looked over and I made direct eye contact with the guy who had the keys. After we both gave an awkward smile, he broke eye contact and he walked over to another man who I didn't really get a good look at, and they kept looking at my friend and I. So we got up and walked over to the little playground near where we just were, and we just kind of talked, but this time she was paying attention to where the guys were. Not even a minute later, the two men walked by over to a small patch of woods that had a red car parked near it. Due to where I was sitting, I couldn't see the men anymore, but my friend could, and she said that the blonde one kept peeking back at us from behind a tree, and the other one was out of sight. So we decided to use this to our advantage, and we ran over to the little restaurant type thing, which gave us a clear view of them, and them a clear view of us. The blonde guy got into the car with who we believe to be the other guy. Now, our fight or flight was kicking in, and we both chose flight. So we went behind the restaurant, which was closed and had been for about an hour. We both ran down the stairs to behind a transport truck that had been there since early the day before, so we knew the driver wasn't in there. My friend looked out from behind the truck and saw the car from earlier circling around the area, So as soon as it was out of sight, we ran as fast as we could, and thankfully there were other people around, so we calmed down, knowing that the guys probably wouldn't come for us with other people there. We made it back to our campsite safely and watched movies and stuff before we went to bed, and we didn't see the guys for the rest of the trip. Now, I know that probably wasn't the scariest of encounters out there, but it left us shaken to our core because who knows what would have happened if I wasn't always hyper aware of my surroundings. I'm a 31-year-old female, and I love doing my grocery shopping at night because it's far less crowded and it's a little bit therapeutic for me. This happened just a couple of nights ago. I was leaving from my shift at the hospital, so it's nighttime. I've loaded my groceries into my car and I'm heading home. I'm very much aware of my surroundings at all times, especially at night. I leave the parking lot with no one seemingly around me, no pedestrians or anybody else leaving in their vehicles. The way home for me requires that I turn left onto the main road. And I'm not even kidding, as soon as I've made my turn onto the highway, there was a car right behind me, also pulling onto the highway with me. It looked like there were flashing lights behind me, and I start to panic, thinking, oh shoot, did I make a wonky traffic move? Or maybe there was a police cruiser further up the road, but no, there was nothing. I figured it was just the car behind me hitting a bump in the road and it was their headlights reacting to that. Okay, cool. Now, this road has 2 lanes and I need to make a right turn off of it later. So, I get over in the right lane. Unfortunately, there's a line of traffic full of others needing to turn right as well, sooner than where my turn is, so I safely get back into the left lane to bypass all of the congestion. Now, the other car that appeared from nowhere at the grocery store is far behind me. As I'm bypassing this congested traffic, I see flashing lights again. Then I think, okay, cool, I get it, dude. It's now clear that they were the ones flashing their lights at me before as well, and I move over back into the right lane once it's clear, thinking they're definitely trying to tear up the road, right? Well, wrong. Whoever this person is slowly creeping up beside me and coasts alongside me, still flashing their lights. It's a black luxury car, a BMW. I try looking into their cab to maybe see if it's someone I know, but I can't make out a dang thing. They continue to ride beside me for a few more blocks until my gut suddenly clenches up like a fist. I finally let off my accelerator and let them coast farther ahead. They seemed to try to slow down too, but I'm having none of it, and I slow down even more until my turn. I don't even signal, I just veer off and head home. Now, what did I encounter that night? My headlights were on, so they couldn't have been signaling me for that. They were not trying to pass me. My car is brand new, so there were no weird issues happening that they could have been trying to tell me. What were they trying to do with me? I was, and still am, freaked out. Me and my friends enjoy making mountain bike trails in the woods on a mountain near our houses. One day, they couldn't go outside, so I brought my younger sister with me. I was also going to bring my little brother, who was going to be a little bit late since he was at a friend's house. This day was a little bit rainy and it was cold. Nobody would be hiking the trails this day. They had never seen what me and my friends had been working on the past couple of months, so that day was the day to show them. Basically, you walk straight to a trail, and when it turns 90 degrees, you go off the trail, then around a bend, and there is an overgrown, abandoned forest road. At the end of this forest road, we had a small trail that led to the bottom of our MTB trail. Me and my sister waited for my little brother, but then my mom called me, telling me that my brother didn't know where to go, so I told my sister to go all the way back and wait for him outside the trail in the neighborhood. She never saw him since he decided he didn't know where to go, despite the clear instructions, since my mom then called me once more, telling me that he was back home. Then I called my sister to tell her to come back up the trail, telling her very clearly, make sure nobody's following you. This wasn't for our safety, but so nobody would discover these trails that me and my friends were building. But this time, it was different. As my sister was walking up the trail, I could look from the side all the way across the forest road where she was on her way up. Then I thought to myself, was she wearing a white jacket before? Then I realized, as the figure got more towards the clearing, that this wasn't my little sister. This was a grown man. Nobody would ever find this trail, and if they did, they would have no reason to come up here. Plus, the rain for the past couple of days made the trail mostly muddy, like extremely muddy. I started running down the trail and then behind a tree so that I could call my sister and tell her not to go up the trail. Then I heard, "What are you doing?" It was my little sister. She had already made it all the way up back to the trail, and then I knew what happened. This man followed my sister up the trail. I was terrified, and I can tell my sister started to pick up on that, and I was being very serious. We waited around 10 minutes, but we couldn't see the person anymore. There was no way to go but up the trail towards us, unless this person hid in the trees off the forest road. As we made our way back quickly and quietly, I felt the sense that I was being watched. We made it to our bikes, which were thankfully still there, and I told my sister to pick up her bike so that we could walk through the rest of the trail without the noise of our hubs clicking. This way, we could hear everything going on around us. Then I saw, just towards the entrance of the trail where it was much easier to see footprints, there was one set of large boot prints on top of my sister's small footprints, meaning they were more recent. That confirmed for me right then and there that I was not going insane. We started riding our bikes to the neighborhood where I made sure that we weren't being followed. Luckily, we made it back home. We told our parents, who were glad I was out there as well, and all I could think was, what if I wasn't there? What would have happened to my sister? Alright, so check this out. When I was around 6 or 7 years old, my brother had a friend from school come over for dinner, along with his mother and her boyfriend. I don't remember much about the boyfriend except that I didn't like him. He wanted to play airplane with me, you know, where the adult lays on their back with their feet in the air and the kid lays on their feet and acts like they're flying. I mean, he did it in front of everyone and he never tried to get me alone, but I didn't like it. I told my parents that I didn't like him, and if I recall correctly, I believe they didn't really care for him either. Needless to say, he never came to our house again. Not long after that, my brother's friend's mom went missing and was later found dead. It turns out he killed her. I've never gotten over it, and the fact that even as a young child, something about this man just rubbed me wrong still freaks me out to this day. Listen to your gut. There's a reason you get that feeling about a person or a place. I walk most places because, being severely visually impaired, I obviously can't drive. I walk at night during summer, which lasts anywhere from April to October if we're lucky. This is probably not the safest idea, but I'm from Texas, so temperatures of 100 degrees aren't unusual. One of my usual destinations was a convenience store a few blocks from my previous house. I set out one night to get myself some Pepsi and a candy stash. Our town isn't very big and most people drive everywhere. It's very unusual to come across anyone else on my route to the store, but that night a man appeared out of nowhere and started talking like he knew me. He asked me where I was going, and I told him. It wasn't unusual for people to keep watch on me because I'm hard of hearing, mostly blind, and have forearm crutches. This guy had no reason to be there and was walking way too close to me. I sped up as much as I could since this part of the route is very dark and only has a subway that was closed for the night. He definitely wasn't there for a $5 footlong. I tried to remain calm, though the alarm bells were ringing and I was shaking to the point that I was afraid I'd drop a crutch, which was probably the worst thing that could happen right then. Especially after he started asking what I liked in the bedroom and he could easily have his way with me in the ditch and no one would know. I felt sick, but I continued my walk. The convenience store I was going to was only 20 yards away and I knew the guy that was working the graveyard shift. I got safely inside and my friend handed me a bag to carry my stuff in until I was ready to check out. And when I got up to the register, he began speaking loudly enough that my ears hurt, and I had to turn my hearing aids down because it hurt so bad. "Hey, sweets, did you ever find my 3DS?" I played along, and he opened the half-door thing, and I sat on the stool like it was normal. Creepy dude came over and slammed his Bud Light and a $10 bill on the counter. After being handed his change, he went outside. He's still out there by the ice machine. After about 20 minutes, he still hadn't left. My friend called his manager, and after explaining the situation, she told him to lock up and to run me home. He did, and he even walked me to my door. I put the key in the door and we stepped inside. He handed me a keychain and showed me how to lock and unlock the pepper spray. My friend told me to call him before I come from now on. He said that creepy guy's been coming in after me for the last 4 weeks. He left and I made sure every door and window was locked. So, creepy dude, let's never meet again. This probably isn't nearly as scary as a lot of the stories on this sub, but it's definitely one of the creepier things I've ever experienced. This happened some years ago. I think I was 20. I was going on a road trip of a sort with a really good friend of mine and his family. Our destination was a concert in a country next to ours, but we would be stopping at night to sleep in the camper that we were driving in. We hadn't crossed the border yet when we stopped at the first campsite for the night. Now, it seemed like a pretty family-friendly and safe place, so none of us had our guards up or anything. And that night, at about 11 p.m. or so, while my friend and his family were getting ready for bed, I went outside to get some fresh air. Our camper was almost completely next to the beach, so I went down to the shore to dip my feet and get some much-needed quiet time just by myself. On the way there, I passed by a beach shack, a detail that will be important later. As I stood there, letting the waves lap over my feet, I noticed the silhouette of a man further down the beach, but it was a public space for campers, so I didn't really think much of it. After being absorbed by splashing in the water with my feet and enjoying the moonlight, I decided to make my way back. Of course, it was very dark given the late hour, but I don't scare easily. Now, as a woman in the modern world, I usually do stay on my guard after dark, but that thought never occurred to me since I felt I was in a safe environment so close to the campsite. Anyways, as I was walking back, I noticed that the silhouette of the man further down the beach was gone. But even more worrying was the fact that I was nearing the beach shack. I saw that someone seemed to be trying to hide from my view behind it. Immediately, I was on alert and called a friend that I knew would be awake. I gave the shack a wide berth while talking loudly to my friend about how she was coming to meet me. After not too long, I got safely back to the campsite and hopped in bed in the caravan. I didn't tell my friend or his family because even though I was scared, There could have been many logical, non-threatening explanations to what I saw. I put it out of mind, and the rest of the trip went off without a hitch. About a year or so later, I was talking to my friend about the trip, and suddenly I remembered the creepy experience. As I told him, he slowly got pale, though, and told me something his brother had told him and his family over breakfast some months after the trip. That same night, after I had gotten back and gone to bed, his brother had gotten up late at night to get some water, but when he passed the window right by his bed, he saw a man standing right there outside, looking in the window. As soon as he was seen, the man left, but it definitely creeped out the brother a lot. But just like me, he seemed to put it out of his mind. Now, with both of those stories, it doesn't seem far-fetched that the man hiding by the beach shack had followed me back. I really am scared to think about what would have happened if I had been alone. For those of you who frequent this sub, the fight or flight response is one that's discussed frequently. Later, this term was updated to fight, flight, or freeze to better encompass the range of human responses to acute stress. Luckily for me, I've never been a freezer. However, that doesn't mean that I always choose one of the other two responses either. Instead, when I'm under stress, my brain goes into overdrive, rapidly throwing up possible solutions to my current problem. The more stressed I am, the faster it ticks. It was early evening in the late 2000s. I was in college, walking home from class along a busy street in the crappy neighborhood that was all I could afford to live in at the time. Out of nowhere, a car pulls up right next to me and slams on the brakes. "Get in the car," the driver yells out the window at me, immediately aggressive. I'm like, what? I take in the scene. It's an old, small, beat-up red car. 4 passengers, all young guys, relatively fit. I'm badly outnumbered, and this is not good. The 2 up front are leaning forward in their seats, staring at me, agitated, most likely on something. I can't see much of the guys in the back except that they're crammed in there. Front 2 aren't wearing seatbelts. Is really not good. On top of that, despite other people being around, I'm in a neighborhood in a city where people don't stop to help, they don't call the cops, and don't get involved when they witness violence or crimes. No one walking past has slowed down or even turned our way. Again, really not good. In the couple seconds that it takes me to soak all of this in, the driver decides to fill the silence. "Get in the car. I said, get in the car now. We're going to a party and you're coming with us." Even more aggressively than before. Oh boy, there goes my brain. Tick, 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 tick. This tone, this manner, this guy is expecting me to refuse. It's like he's just waiting for me to escalate the interaction. This was before I was active online. I had never heard of incels or MRAs or any of that stuff, but this guy is acting like a guy who's sick of girls refusing his advances. He's had enough, and this time, he's going to put his foot down. My brain is again throwing up every possible response that I can make, playing out the most likely outcome, and knocking them down one by one. And finally, it lands. Though I wouldn't know what it was called until many years later, I had just discovered fawn mode. My face cracks into a huge smile. Oh my god, that sounds like so much fun. Suddenly, I drop the smile to a look of devastation. Oh no, but I can't today. I've got a dinner with my family. Oh, this sucks so much. I would so rather go to a party, but thanks for inviting me. I start slowly walking up the street, not breaking eye contact, smiling and waving while still trying to close the distance that I'd have to dash if stuff hit the fan. The car creeps along, keeping pace with me. The driver now sighs. He says, "Just get in the car." Far less aggressive now, and I can't believe that this is working. I lean into the ditzy persona that I've now adopted, I say, I'd love to, really. I want to go so much. But my family's waiting for me just up the street. And you guys are so nice. I hope you have such a good time. Next time, for sure I'll go. You guys are super fun, right? Yeah, I can tell. The driver's posture is becoming less tense. His grip on the steering wheel is more relaxed. And is that the beginning of a reluctant grin lifting from the sides of his mouth? He likes the flattery. I'm thinking to myself, damn girl, you might just be able to talk your way out of this one. Yeah, you guys look super fun. A party with some cute fun guys? I'm so there. Call me for the next one. I stick my thumb and pinky to the side of my head and start nodding at them. You have to call me, all right? The passenger starts nodding back first and finally slumps back in his seat. Yeah. I keep chattering. Have so much fun though. Have extra fun for me. I hate that I can't be there. The driver finally leans back in his chair and smiles. Yeah, all right, next time. And he finally drives off. These guys seem to have forgotten that they don't know me from Eve and don't have my number. I wave at them, wait for them to be out of sight, and then I finally breathe a sigh of relief. I power walk the last few hundred meters home, and I go upstairs to tell my roommates, Matt and Lisa, what just happened. I probably don't need to mention that living in that city is getting old. My boyfriend, who's a 23-year-old male, and I, a 23-year-old female, recently decided that we wanted to take the new tent we bought on its first trip. The tent was one that hooks up to your car to provide more storage space, and we were excited to try it out. We had planned a kayaking trip the next day at a kayak rental shop. It was supposed to be a nice, inexpensive, outdoorsy weekend getaway. We tend to book things at the last minute, so all the state parks and professional campgrounds were full. This led us to a website that's essentially an Airbnb for campsites. The place we chose was a 100-acre property just 20 minutes south of the kayak shop. Of all the sites in the area, it was described as having working bathrooms, showers, it allowed for campfires, and all the sites were car accessible, which is important for a car-dependent tent. This site was also the most reviewed in the area with 3 5 out of 5-star reviews. The area was very rural, so we didn't think much about the low number of reviews for any of the campsites. The renter was Mary, who only ever texted us updates, but seemed sweet. We start our 2-hour drive a bit later than we anticipated, which put us behind the 11 a.m. time we had originally informed the host, but we tried to keep her updated with the new schedule. She just told us to let her know when we arrive at the address that she sent us. We arrived to the address and are greeted with the barn from the pictures. It had string lights all over it. It seemed fairly new and just gave a nice feel. We sit in the car for a minute and we struggle with cell service to text the host to let her know that we had arrived. 10 minutes after our text sends, a sweaty man who appears to be in his 60s pulls up in an ATV. He lets us know that he's the father-in-law to Mary, and she's busy taking care of the seasonal harvest and sent him instead. He lets us know that we can take the car anywhere on the property and offers to show us around in the ATV. My boyfriend, who's visibly uncomfortable, declines the offer and asks a few more questions about the woods and how far into them we're allowed to take the car. He says anywhere. There are no designated campsites. We can go anywhere, and the ATV man even offers to help pull my car out if it gets stuck. We ask one final question about the cell service, and he jokes that if we're from around here, we'll understand that reception works better on one side of the barn than the other. Well, I am from around here, and I thought that was funny, but once he said that, I realized he didn't have any ounce of an accent for here like he should. Eventually, he leaves, and we begin exploring the property on foot. The barn is nice and maintained. It was fully lit in the middle of the day with the string lights decorating the interior as well. It's insulated and has a working kitchen. The only warning we got was to not drink the water. It seemed like a place that would host small 50-guest weddings. We walk past a shed out behind the barn to get to the trails that ran through the woods. And after going through a hike that my car would have never survived, we decided it might be best just to camp by a small creek, and we chose a spot on the side opposite of the barn. We were still within walking distance, but we used my car as a buffer to feel more isolated. We choose our spot and then go into the main town to eat and walk around. We message Mary about the fire policy, and she tells us that they'll deliver a fire ring to the barn for us to take to camp. We arrive back at the barn about an hour and a half from nighttime. We drive by the barn, and the lights have been turned off. We assume it was on a timer as to not waste energy or money. We also notice the fire ring had not yet been delivered. We start the grueling 30-minute setup in the sticky heat and reward ourselves with a sit in the air-conditioned car. We notice it looks like it's about to rain, so my boyfriend and I pull out a card game and wait for it to pass. It only lasted about 10 minutes, but it's starting to be sunset now too. The tent held up nicely, so we felt okay leaving it for a second. Needing to use the bathroom, we start walking to the barn. As we cross the creek, we hear what sounds to be like someone in the shed moving things around. A bit unsettling, but I tell my boyfriend that maybe they used equipment today and it's just sitting in there making the cracking cool-off noise that it sometimes does. We get to the barn and the lights are still off, but the fire ring is there. We go in and check to make sure the power is off and it's not just the lights outside. And none of the light switches work, so we assume the power is actually cut. Again, maybe it's just on a timer. No worries. We step out of the barn and get 10 feet away, and we hear a hum in the distance to the opposite side of the shed. The power to the barn is restored. We change direction to use the bathroom. As soon as we step inside, the power cuts. I start to get a weird feeling, and I can tell he has the same feeling too. I look to my boyfriend and say, maybe they're just watching us. I immediately follow it up with, no, that's a lot worse. We walk back outside and turn the lights on. My boyfriend says that we need to leave, and I have that same gut-wrenching primal fear. We put the ring back by the barn since we had moved it 10 feet and the barn lights started flickering. We briskly walk back to the car. Being from Appalachia, I know better than to run. The 30-minute setup was torn down and packed up in 5 minutes, and we jump in the car and lock it. I managed to get my car going, thanking God that the rain did not get my car stuck. We start toward the driveway, and just as we made it to the road, my boyfriend looks back and sees a man standing by the shed, watching us. As soon as my car pulls off onto the road, we get a text from Mary letting us know that the fire ring is out by the barn. She also informs us that we're welcome to stay in the barn if the rain had messed up our camping experience. We arrive at a nice hotel, willing to splurge for safety. At this point, it's like 10 p.m. at the earliest. A sweet older lady checks us in. Desperate for validation and just comfort from anyone, we tell her what had just happened to us at the campsite, and she looks shocked. She asks if we'd seen the news lately, which we both respond that we had not. The lady tells us that couples in the state have been going missing. All of them had gone camping. The 3 couples were truly missing, and one was recently found on the side of the freeway, slashed to near death. They are, to the time of this posting, still recovering in the hospital. We couldn't find many articles about where in the state, but the look on the lady's face suggested that it was near us. We get to our room and text Mary back to tell her that we're not staying. All we get back is a text that says, "Thank you for staying with us." We lock the door and I break down into tears. I will not forget the feeling that I got in that barn. The primal fight or flight feeling and the feeling of being watched. I feel it in my throat just writing this. I never want to experience that again. So, to the man by the shed who watched us drive away, let's never meet. So this happened to me when I was 11 or 12 years old. It was over a decade ago, and I still remember it vividly. At the time, I lived in a semi-detached house with my mom, my dad, and a sibling. It was decent sized, but the most impressive part was the garden, which essentially had 3 levels. The first level was concrete, the second, grass, and the third was also grass, and that had my trampoline on it. At the very end of the garden was a tree embankment. The area that I lived in was somewhat hilly. One morning, I woke up to a cracking sound like a snapped branch, and I was worried since a week earlier a tree from the embankment had fallen onto our neighbor's garden. My bedroom was at the back of the house overlooking the garden, so I opened the curtains to see if another tree had fallen. Instead, I saw a guy hiding in one of the trees in the garden. He was pale with blonde hair and wearing all black clothing. He was looking directly at me, presumably because he saw the curtains move. He started smirking and moved his finger in a "come here" motion. I totally freaked out, and I shouted for my mom and my dad to come into my room. I was so scared I physically felt like I couldn't move. And this was super early in the morning, by the way, around 5 a.m., so it took my dad a good 30 seconds to get into my room, at which point the stranger had already hidden behind the trees. I remember being really shaken up, and I was crying while I told my dad what happened. He went out into the back garden to see if he could spot the guy, but he was gone by that point. A bit of time passed, and I started to forget about it. Then, about 3 months after that, my mom and I were watching TV together after I'd finished school. The doorbell rang, and my mom went to answer it. I looked out the window of the living room where we were sat, and I saw a white van parked outside. It was the same van as my uncle's, so I walked out of the living room and into the hallway, expecting to meet him. When I got to the porch where my mom was stood, I realized it wasn't my uncle. It was the same guy I had seen in the garden just a few months prior, and it really freaked me out. He noticed me as I walked behind my mom, and he gave me the same smirk as when he was in the garden. I wanted to say something to my mom, but I couldn't. I was freaking out inside. Anyway, he just asked my mom if she needed any work done on the driveway, and she said no, so he got back into his van and drove off. He didn't give her a business card or anything, and the van didn't have any company branding, and he didn't knock on any of our neighbors' doors. I told my mom that it was the same guy I saw in the garden as soon as he left, and she started to feel uneasy about the whole situation too. A month or so after I got my first job doing the paper round, I had to deliver over 300 papers with my best friend at the time. It was getting towards winter, and it was dark by like 4:30. We'd been doing the job together for around a month. When the one evening after school it was super dark and rainy, we were halfway through delivering the newspapers, and a van started following us. It was driving really slow, at the same pace we were walking. We realized that it was following us after about a minute, and we started to panic as I noticed it was the same guy again. We left the newspaper trolley and started walking quite fast up the hill, and we were about a 10-minute walk from my house. I rang my mom, who made me stay on the line while she left the house to meet us. She told us to go to the corner shop that we were about a minute away from. When we made it to the shop, the van sped off really fast. The police were called, who came to my house for a report, and we told them everything. This was the last time I ever saw that creepy stranger, but I still remember what he looked like so vividly. I went out with 2 of my sisters to Detroit because we love urban exploring when we can, and we wanted to check out the abandoned zoo on Belle Isle. There's a pretty cool little covered bridge that we stopped at in the park, and there was this guy there just kind of hanging out. He was very well dressed, friendly looking, and he started talking to us, casually asking us where we came from and where we were going. He mentioned that he was a photographer, and when we asked where his camera was, he said it was in his car. As he kept talking, he was really emphasizing how he was married and had children, but there was no ring on his finger. He was particularly interested in my older sister, who's a blonde, whereas I am a brunette. I'm not sure if this is relevant, but it was pretty clear he was mostly interested in talking to her. I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention at the time, but when he left, my sister told me she got really bad vibes from him and thought he was lying about everything. Ultimately, we didn't go into the abandoned zoo because we realized we told him that's where we would be, and he said he would also be taking pictures there later, coincidentally. This may just be nothing, but intuition tells me that we made the right decision not to explore that day. Also, pro tip, never ever tell strangers where you'll be, especially if you're going somewhere abandoned. I recently moved out into an apartment building all the way up on the top floor. My balcony is at the back of the building and the view is mostly trees, but there are some houses and a street directly behind the apartment building, so I can see that too. I usually sit out on my balcony at night, getting high and listening to music. At night, the view is just darkness aside from the house porch lights and the road lit up by streetlight. Most of the road view is covered by trees, but I can still see a good amount of it. There's also no light from my balcony, so at night I just sit in the dark, aside from the light coming from my phone. So anyway, I was sitting out there around 10 p.m. or so like I usually do, and I noticed some movement from the road. When I looked down, I saw someone running down the road, like really fast. From my distance, it looked like this person was running faster than any human should. I was just watching when this person just stopped under a street lamp. Under the light, I could tell that this person was a man. I also realized that he was now looking up at me. I got nervous, but I didn't move because I thought I could just be overthinking and maybe this guy wasn't actually looking at me. I mean, how could he? My phone wasn't on, so I was pretty much sitting in complete darkness. Could he really see me from all the way down there? I just kept sitting there, hoping the guy would leave, but then I saw him waving at me. Now I knew he was looking at me. I was too uncomfortable to do anything. I couldn't even go back inside. I just sat there, getting increasingly nervous. My thoughts started to run wild. I thought this guy might find my apartment and then try to break in. I also thought he would somehow just sprint forward and climb up the building to get to me or something. But as I kept staring at this guy just waving at me, a sudden feeling of dread came over me. That was when I started grabbing my things to go back inside. But then I saw that he had stopped waving. He reached both his arms out to the side and then started swaying his body from side to side, bending his knees as he moved and wiggling his arms around like a weird dance move. At this point, I was incredibly unsettled and just wanted to get back inside, but I was also slightly intrigued in a way, and I guess I wanted to see what he might do next. Soon, the feelings of dread and unease took over, and I continued closing up all of my stuff, and I went back inside. There was a window in the room next to the balcony where you could see down to the same area, so I peeked outside, trying to stay hidden behind the wall. I saw this guy still moving around side to side, but he soon stopped, and I saw him just start booking it down the road again. I made sure my front door was locked, and I went back to my room, locking the bedroom door as well. My bedroom window looks out to the same direction, so I made sure that the guy was gone and closed my curtains. I didn't really sleep that night. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I had. This happened a couple of nights ago, and I haven't seen this guy since. I've still been sitting out on the balcony, but I've been getting really paranoid when I'm out there at night, so I don't stay out for as long as I used to. I don't really know what to make of this whole thing. And I don't know who that guy was, or maybe what he was, but I get really uncomfortable and paranoid when I think about that night. Like I'm back in that moment, feeling those exact feelings again. And since then, I get occasional waves of dread, like at times throughout the day, I get the feeling that I'm being watched. I hope this feeling goes away soon, and I'm really hoping I don't see that guy ever again. My grandfather, Jim, died when I was 17. This was about 5 years ago, and his last months were rough on the whole family. He had advanced brain cancer, but he spent most of his time at home under hospice care. One afternoon, it was about 2 weeks before Jim died, I was alone with my grandpa waiting for the hospice nurse to come check on him. A man who I'd never seen before, I guess his name was Dave, knocked on the door. He was wearing hospital scrubs, but he hadn't brought any equipment with him, which was odd. I asked him if he worked for the hospital, and he nodded. He said this was his first shift with Jim, but that he'd reviewed my grandfather's file and that he wanted to speak to whichever family member had the legal authority to pull the plug. And Jim wasn't even on life support, so I guess Dave was just using plug as an expression. I should say that I live in a right to die state where euthanasia is legal, so it's not like that option had never occurred to us, but as far as I know, no member of my family had ever expressed an openness to euthanizing Jim. I told him that I had no authority to make that decision and that my grandfather, who was now delirious and unable to consent to much of anything, had specifically said to prolong his life indefinitely unless he was crying out in extreme pain, which he wasn't. Dave put his hand on my shoulder as though he were consoling me, and he told me about how old people become burdens that their families need to let go of. Then Dave pulled a bottle of pills out of his pocket and said they were barbiturates that would trigger a peaceful death. And he mentioned that the coroner would determine that Jim died naturally from his cancer. I started to panic, and I firmly told him that under no circumstances would we be euthanizing Jim at this time, but he started to untwist the bottle as he walked towards Jim's bed. I tried to wrestle the pills from his hand, and he seemed startled. He played innocent and said he just wanted to show the pills to Jim, but Dave knew perfectly well that my grandfather had almost no idea what was going on. I called 911 and I rapidly explained the situation to the dispatcher. Dave suddenly became very scared and bolted out of the house. The cops arrived within 5 minutes, and Jim's actual hospice nurse arrived a few minutes after that. Based on my physical description, the police and hospital staff were able to identify Dave as a recently fired hospital orderly. Dave was charged with making a criminal threat based on my testimony, but unfortunately he was acquitted. So Dave, wherever you are, let's never meet again. I went to the library yesterday to drop off some books that were due, but when I drove up to the outdoor book return, the chute wouldn't open. I figured I must not have known how to open it, so I decided to go inside and return them there. As I was walking towards the doors, I noticed a man with earbuds sitting on a bench near the entrance. I thought nothing of it and just kept walking, but when I got to the door, I found that it was locked. I was surprised because I didn't think the library would be closed yet. I knew that they were supposed to be closed for Labor Day, but I didn't think that they would be closed the day before as well. There were cars parked outside too. I shrugged it off and walked back to my car, which was parked just a few meters away. I didn't look behind me, but as I was walking back, I heard the man singing loudly to himself. It sounded more like he was yelling. I thought it was a little weird and wondered if he was directing it at me because I was leaving, but I just ignored it. I've never heard anyone sing to themselves in public like that, so it creeped me out a little, but not enough to raise any red flags. As soon as I got back in my car, the man started waving at me to come over. I froze up for a moment because I wondered what he needed. I was the only one in the parking lot, so I was sure he wasn't beckoning to anybody else. But then I remembered a warning that my dad had given me not to come over when a stranger beckons at me. He specifically told me that because of this one encounter I'd had at the park that was similar. Either way, I found it odd, so I locked my doors and I drove away. He kept staring at my car as I left, and honestly I felt a little guilty because I didn't want to seem rude or stuck up, but I didn't know what his intentions were. I gave it some thought later and figured he might have just wanted to tell me that the library was closed. But if he'd wanted to tell me that, he could have told me when I was at the door. There was no reason for him to beckon me over after I had just gotten into my car. I honestly don't know what to make of it. I think I may have overreacted a little, and I suppose I could have driven up to the curb and lowered my window, but I didn't like the idea of that either. It could have been completely harmless and I just misjudged, but I can't tell for sure. I didn't mean to be rude, I just drove away because the situation creeped me out. At the time of this story, I was 21 and living in a major Midwestern city, attending the university there. Having lived there for only 1 month before my story began, I had witnessed a train stop stabbing, been yelled at by a crackhead, had a homeless guy follow me and then threatened to choke me outside the physics building on campus, and watched a 13-car cop raid on a drug house just across the street. The area around the university is known for being rough and has a notoriously high rate of crime. We would get a few texts a week from the campus police saying things like there had been a robbery, a break-in, an assault, some stalkings, attempted kidnappings. You get it. I always ignored these texts, thinking foolishly that I would never be a victim because I was smart enough to stay out of trouble, not to go out alone late at night, and, well, all the other cliches. I seriously regret this behavior now, and to anyone listening to this, please never think that you're 100% safe, no matter your level of preparedness. Always do your best to stay observant and careful. The first incident wasn't too unusual. I was just a block or two from my apartment building one day in the early evening. It was still light outside, and I was walking my dog, Sesame, a cute Shiba Inu who just looks like a fluffy, goofy puppy and has never been frightening or particularly protective in his life. As I was heading back home, I passed a small parking lot, and in it was a large van. I could see a man in his maybe early 60s sitting in the driver's seat, smoking a cigarette. He was staring at me. As I passed, he actually leaned out of his car and called out to me. He said, "Hey, you there. That's a cute dog. What's his name?" I should mention this isn't even my first story like this. I have a pretty intense fear of strangers, and I actually struggle with PTSD from other incidents in my life. Being pretty wary for this reason, I ignored him and I just started to walk faster. I heard a car door shut behind me, and I turned quickly to see that he had gotten out of his van and was slowly walking toward me. He called out to me again. He said, "Hey baby, I just want to see your dog. Come back." His phrasing pissed me off, and I gripped my dog's leash and started to speed walk away from him, starting to feel nervous. My heart was beginning to pound, but I kept telling myself over and over that I was overreacting and it was just my paranoia acting up and there was really nothing to worry about. Boy, was I wrong. I managed to turn the corner and was about to cross the final park before getting to my apartment. In my fear over the van guy, I wasn't paying attention as much as I usually do to what was in front of me. I looked back over my shoulder and the guy had stopped following me. He was, however, standing in the middle of the sidewalk with a huge, creepy grin on his face. I whirled back around with my eyes glued to my building. I only needed to walk another half a block and then I'd be home. I was going to get away from him and his creepy van. Just when I thought I was safe, a group of 5 or 6 men came from the side of the park that I wasn't watching. They were all tall and intimidating in stature, and all of them were laughing and looking right at me. Out of the corner of my eye, the van guy had started walking towards me as well. I remember he was whistling. I again picked up my pace and desperately searched for my keys in my pocket as I hurried to the door. The group of men then veered towards me, partially cutting me off, and in all my stupid politeness, I stopped. They grinned at me with sick, perverted smiles, obviously checking me out, looking me up and down, and it just made me sick. I tried not to panic and inched closer to my apartment. "Hey, what's your name? Where are you going? What's your Snapchat? Is that your apartment? Can we come over? Do you smoke?" They all just barraged me with questions, one after another. I tried to refuse them, stammering, No, thank you," as I saw the van guy come and join their group, leering at me. While I inched away, they inched closer. One of them then reached out for me, his fingers actually touching my arm. I leapt back, trying not to start crying, but Sesame suddenly lunged at them, his teeth bared, a horrifying snarl ripping from his throat. Every bit of cute Shiba personality was gone, and he looked like he was wanting to tear one of those guys' throats out. It startled them enough that I was able to turn and sprint the final distance to my building, locking the door behind me. I fell to the floor inside my building, hugging Sesame. However, the entire front of my building was glass, and to my horror and disbelief, the group of men came and stood in front of the windows, grinning at me, laughing and making kissy faces and lewd gestures at me. The apartment manager came out and called the cops on them, but they ran away. I made it back home and scrubbed myself in the shower, crying and shaking with fear. Sesame got a special dinner that evening, and I kept telling myself that they just wanted to mess with me and I was never in any real danger. Stupid of me, I know now. About a month later, when I had finally managed to be able to walk outside my apartment without severe anxiety, I was actually planning on moving a bit farther away from campus. It was still going to be in a sketchy neighborhood, but the thought of those men knowing where I lived kept me up at night. My apartment actually hired a security guard to be there 24/7 after someone had broken into the building, smashed all the windows, destroyed some furniture, and stolen a bunch of bikes. And of course, my bike got stolen. Anyways, I was heading home from class, and it was a beautiful day. I actually felt pretty happy for once, and I popped my earbuds in on the last few blocks before I got home. Again, stupid. After a block or so, I started to feel like somebody was watching me. My palms started sweating. I glanced behind me, trying not to look obvious, and a tall man was about 20 feet behind me, staring straight at me. I snapped my head back around and ripped out my earbuds. No, I thought. It can't be one of them. I was just jumping to conclusions given my anxiety disorder and paranoia, surely, but there was something familiar about him. My heart started racing, as I hoped to God the others weren't waiting for me around the corner of my building, just ready to jump me. I walked faster, wishing that Sesame was with me. I was too afraid to look back at him as I fumbled with my keys and wrenched the door open as hard as I could. This turned out to be a crucial mistake. As I ran to the elevator, trying to breathe a sigh of relief, I saw with absolute horror that the man had caught the door that I had thrown wide open and was slowly coming into the building with me. He paused, standing away from me, but close enough that I could hear his ragged breathing and smell alcohol coming off him. My heart was thudding in my chest now, and I struggled to think clearly. The apartment manager was already home for the day, and I was completely alone in the lobby. There were no other doors out of that room, and the stranger was blocking my only exit. The security guard that was supposed to be keeping an eye on the building was nowhere to be seen. The elevator came and I tried to run into it and slam my hand over the door close button as fast as I could. I pushed my floor button and huddled in the far corner of the elevator. I started to once again try to catch my breath, but right when the door was almost closed, he stuck his hand in. I couldn't believe it. He waited until the door was just about to close and then he stopped it. He was standing close enough that there was no way that was a mistake. My stomach dropped and a suffocating sense of dread crept in. I kept my head down as he joined me. My desperate hope that he was just a dirty, drunken resident of the building was dashed when he didn't press any buttons. I don't know why I didn't run out of the elevator or try to leave the building again. I was paralyzed with fear and all I could do was watch as the door closed and sealed my fate. The elevator was filled with the stench of alcohol and BO. If I wasn't so terrified, I might have gagged. It was nauseating. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't move. I tried to scream at myself in my head to press the wrong button and try to escape him, but I was totally petrified. He leaned closer to me, and I heard him breathe in deeply and very quietly sigh like he was content. I felt tears well in my eyes, and the seconds it took to reach the top floor where I lived felt like hours. I saw no way that I could escape the sick, drunk guy who was smelling me now. In the reflection of the elevator walls, I could make out his disgusting smile. He was staring directly at me, with his hands in his pockets, clearly holding on to something. I'm not religious, but I prayed that I would make it to my door in time. I realized he probably wasn't going to attack me in the elevator. There was a large camera in the ceiling. I looked up at it, feeling a tear spill out of my eye as I did so, hoping that whoever saw the tape eventually would identify this man. The worst part about all of this is that I've trained in martial arts and self-defense since I was about 8 years old. I thought of myself as stronger and braver than I was acting. I should know what to do. I should be strong enough to do it. But no matter how many times I had disarmed, thrown, or choked out attackers in the studio, nothing totally prepares you for the dread of a real-life situation. As the elevator reached my floor, I managed to snap out of my stupor just long enough to dash through the door and run to my apartment unit. I nearly missed the keyhole, but I threw open my door. I was nearly through when my backpack snagged on the outside handle of the door, trapping me. I heard the man walking quickly to my door, a low chuckle building in his throat as he watched me panic and struggle to get free. I felt like a mouse being watched by a cat. Trapped and helpless, so close to escaping, I finally gave up and shoved my arms through the straps, abandoning my backpack. As I did so, the man suddenly reached out for me. I was able to slam the door shut, deadbolting it, and the gust of air from the door slamming brought his disgusting smell in with me, and in my terror and disgust, I just retched violently. I looked through the peephole, and he was staring right at me, pressing his forehead against the door, his mouth bent in a furious scowl. He swore at me and ripped my backpack off the handle of the door, slamming it to the ground. I winced as I heard my laptop thud on the floor. I was still too terrified to say anything, but I grabbed the knife that I kept by my door, ready if he tried anything. After a few minutes of staring at my door, jiggling the handle, licking the peephole, and making obscene motions at it, he unzipped my backpack, dumping its contents on the floor. He picked up my bag, sniffing it and leering at the peephole as he did so, like he knew I was watching him. I couldn't look away, again paralyzed in fear. Finally, he left, using the elevator visible from my door like nothing had happened. I continued to stare out the peephole for what felt like an eternity and then finally called the apartment manager, feeling my anger sinking in that the security guard hadn't been anywhere in sight, not paying attention. It turns out he had fallen asleep, eating Taco Bell and watching movies on his phone. He was only 10 feet away from the elevator the entire time, sleeping in the office behind a closed door. They fired him, but the creepy guy was never caught, and neither were any of the others. I don't even know for sure if this man was part of the original group. I was honestly too terrified to look much at their faces during the first incident. I moved out of my apartment a week later, staying with my boyfriend at the time for the remainder of my lease, and keeping Sesame with me at all times when possible. A few more things happened while I lived in that city, from having to call in a gunfight from outside my new apartment window, to having to pick up my friend who was being followed by a van, to having to evacuate during an arson incident. There are nice things about that city too, but during my time there, besides learning the police department was absolutely useless and corrupt, to nearly escaping with my life multiple times, I couldn't be happier to be far, far away from there and doing a lot better with my fear and my anxiety. An old friend of mine had a canine search and rescue operation and had several dogs that had different skills. He had dogs that were trained for different things. One to search for human remains, one that was trained to search for live survivors, including through the rubble of accident or disaster sites, and even a little dog that could detect bedbugs. I would sometimes help in the training of the dogs by hiding in the woods or in hard-to-reach areas, and I loved doing it. It's amazing to see these incredible animals working. Plus, I loved them. I sat with them a lot when he was out searching in different parts of the country for actual victims. One afternoon, we were walking through the park with the cadaver dog, who's a beautiful German shepherd who was the face of the company. Not working, but we did have our canine search and rescue attire on when a man approached us. He stopped us to ask if he could pet her, which is not uncommon, and she was super friendly and sweet, so we said of course. The weird thing is that the moment he stopped, the dog immediately gave her signal and lay down right by his feet. My friend and I looked at each other almost in horror because the dog was signaling that she detected human remains. She was the most experienced of all the dogs and would not have made a mistake. It was clearly her signal. It spooked us both so much that we cut the conversation short and left quickly. To this day, we have no idea what that was about. I should also add that she was trained to detect human remains. She was taught not to alert on animal remains. I still think about that day a lot. Since posting this story here, there's been a lot of theories from fellow Redditors. Everything from the guy could have been a mortician to rotting toes or even wearing dead man's shoes, but none of those reasons would have caused this response, and I honestly still have no idea, and neither does my friend, who's a professional. I think seeing him spooked was even more unnerving. He's an army vet that's been in combat, an EMT, and a firefighter, and he's seen some stuff, so he's pretty calm in almost every situation. This happened at a burger joint, but I'm just using Burger King for anonymity. And this happened to my fiancée. She's on vacation and has our puppy with her. They flew some states away. She was walking into Burger King with her friend, and this chain-smoking looking guy asked if he could hold our puppy. That's the first red flag, since strangers usually just ask if they can pet the puppy. Never had anyone ask to hold him. They go in and get their stuff and start walking back to their cars. The creepy dude pops out of nowhere and says, "Oh look, it's the girl who wouldn't let me hold her puppy." At that point, my fiancée quickly got into her car and her friend was nearby watching in case anything happened. They pull out and this guy gets in his car, which was parked kitty-corner to my fiancée's. He follows her for a few miles and then finally breaks off. This story may not be as crazy as other ones on here, but it's still very creepy to her and to me when she called and told me about it. In the city where I live, there's a small drive-through smoothie shack. It's located next to a large body of water, and there are picnic tables for people to sit at around the back of the shack if they want to drink their smoothie and take in the view. About 3 years ago, my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and I decided to go get smoothies as a treat. We pulled into the parking lot and around the back of the shack to get in line. If I remember correctly, there were just 1 or 2 cars in front of us. We pulled up to the menu board and my boyfriend rolled down the window to get a better look. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a very old man shuffled up next to the car. He was dressed pretty well in a sweater and some dress slacks. I could tell he was very old due to the hunched way that he was walking and his white hair. He caught both my husband and I by surprise since we hadn't seen anyone sitting at the tables. The old man rested his hand on the rolled down window and stooped over towards my husband. He said, "You dropped your hat." My husband and I stared at him in confusion. Neither of us wore hats. The old man says it's right there in the street. He pointed behind the car, and my husband and I both turned to look, but there was no hat. He says, "Don't you see it? It's right there." We turned back to look at him, both totally confused, and suddenly the man's voice dropped several octaves and he spoke with a guttural growl. "No? Well, why don't I drag you out of this car with my knife?" At this point, we went from confused to scared. The man was gripping the window with both hands and leaning towards my husband in an aggressive manner. Then, just as abruptly as he'd threatened us, his voice turned cheerful again, and he spoke in an almost sing-song tone with a smile. "Just kidding, just kidding." I motioned to my husband to pull away. The whole encounter was incredibly unsettling. My husband gently began to move the car forward, and the old man was forced to let go. We pulled away without getting our smoothies and went back onto the main road. Neither of us looked back, and we were both shaken up. I checked to see if there were any alerts for a missing elderly person, and it occurred to me that night that he might have had dementia and just wandered off, but I didn't find anything. It took us a while to go back to the smoothie shack after that, but we haven't seen the old man ever since. So this happened to me like a day ago, and I'm really stressed, so I need to tell you guys. My name is Axel, and I'm 16. I live in a really safe place. It's kind of a familial area, and it's really rare that we ever see any police officers or police cars. I'm a big sports guy, and right now, I'm training really hard to upgrade my cardio, and this is an important detail. So, yesterday, when I finished my day at work, I walked by a forest and I saw 2 police cars. I remember saying to myself that this was weird, but I didn't think much about it. 30 minutes later, I go outside to do my jogging. About 10 minutes into my jog, a really weird and suspicious man passes right by me on a bike. He was so close that he almost hit me. So I take a look to see what he looks like. He was a man about 30 years old with really short hair and a big neck tattoo. Also, he had a big backpack on that seemed really heavy. After he almost hit me, I was thinking that he would have to look back to see if I was okay, but he didn't even pay a single bit of attention to me, like he was in a real hurry. So I continue to run, and the story could end there, but it doesn't. I run past another police car. This time he was talking to a guy on a bicycle. This is not the same guy that almost ran me over. Then he let the guy pass, and so I go back to my house, wondering what a really weird run that I had just had. When I got back in my house, my parents asked me if my run was good, and I tell them yes, but it was weird. I told them about the police car that was talking to a guy, and I said there were 2 police cars in front of the forest, and my parents told me, it's probably because they're searching for this guy. Then they show me the news segment from earlier in the evening. It showed a picture of a man, about 30 years old, with really short hair and a big neck tattoo. They said that he was being searched for by the police because he escaped a therapy house and committed a lot of crime, like aggression, possession of illegal weapons, etc. I told my parents, and we agreed that it was probably him that almost hit me with his bike, and I was very lucky that he didn't actually hit me and that I also didn't insult him, because he would have had a very different and more dangerous reaction. I was bored at home alone. I FaceTimed my best friend, who lives in the apartment building next to mine, and I asked him if he would join me in a walk around the neighborhood. But he wasn't around. He was on his way back home from school, which is understandable because it was a Thursday afternoon. There's a jogging circuit near my house. It's like 500 meters away. Due to my massive boredom, I put on my sport clothes. It's a basic t-shirt and some shorts, and the shorts have no pockets. Remember this detail. I then was headed with my music, vibing to the circuit. Arriving there, it was surprisingly not that empty. There was around 8 to 10 people in that 15-kilometer circuit. I started walking for a bit and then ran for a couple of kilometers and then laid down in the grass. I noticed two guys on a motorcycle going back and forth. I didn't care that much since I was FaceTiming my two best friends. It was getting late and it was now around 6 p.m. and I was exhausted. I walked home, but I took another path that's kind of a shortcut. I had to walk through an empty big street with buildings in construction. I've taken this path many times before with no problems. I had a feeling that someone was watching me and following me. I turned around and I noticed the same two guys on that motorcycle were heading towards me. I whispered to my friends on FaceTime that something weird is going to happen and they have to cut their mics and focus with me. Well, the guys came by and one of them asked me where is the nearest barbershop. Out of stress, I just gave them a random location. While the rider of the bike asked me about the barbershop, my right eye twitched and unfocused. I do have this ability, but I was still able to see with it. I saw in the bike's rearview mirror that the other guy was trying to look at where my phone was located. It was between my shorts and my belly because I had no pockets and I had my earphones in. I was freaking out. Time was starting to slow down. Seconds felt like hours and I couldn't feel my legs anymore. They eventually went on, but with a slow speed. It was like they were planning a backup plan or something. I had three options. There was a taxi guy fixing his car. I could have went to him and explained the situation, but my gut said what if they noticed me and then came back to carry on with their plan. Option number 2 was to stop a random car and hop in, then explain the situation, but my gut says no. What if the car was locked? Plus, the guys would have noticed that I knew what they were planning to do and came to me after the random car went on. Or option 3, and this is the one that I chose, was to run in the opposite direction into traffic and take the path that I came by. I instinctively ran for 5 straight minutes. I entered a field and started running towards some slums. I looked back and I saw the guys were coming after me into the field and one of them was shouting, "Just stop, we just want to know where the barber shop is." There's one thing about me, and it's that I always trust my gut. And today, my gut said no, run as fast as you can or you will die today. And that's what I did. I ran between the slums and kept running until I arrived near my best friend's house, who I was still FaceTiming with. I told him to come downstairs right away and I laid down in the parking lot. He came in and was freaked out because he knew that something was happening but didn't know what since I didn't give him any more information. My face turned a pale yellow and I threw up. I couldn't feel my legs or my arms anymore, and he walked me to my house, and I laid down, and from that moment, I don't remember anything. I just remember me waking up the following day with bruises on my leg due to me running into the field full of pikes. This happened about a year ago, but I still think about it. Me and my friends had the munchies and we wanted some Taco Bell at 2 a.m. We were all females and between the ages of 17 and 19 at the time. We took my mom's car and went on our journey. On our way home, though, my friends took a wrong turn and ended up in a cul-de-sac. As we were turning around, a resident on the street gets into his truck and starts pulling out right in front of our car. Us, thinking he's going out somewhere, waits for him to go, but he just sits there for a second before getting out and coming towards the driver's side. I'm sitting in the driver's side in the rear, so I can see him in clear view. He walks up to my friend who's in the driver's seat and he starts yelling at her to slow down and that she's going too fast up and down the street, and so on and so on. We're all just listening in disbelief because she was going like 16 miles an hour in the 25, but whatever. Until he started banging on my friend's window and tried opening her door. Now think about this. Why would somebody be trying to break into a car full of teenage girls? What were they trying to do? I snap out of my shock and I yell at my friend to drive away because I'm just done with this situation. She pulls off and he jumps in his car behind us. I decide to stick my entire upper half of my body out the window to yell at this guy and to also give my friends directions back to my house. Keep in mind it's now after 2 a.m. and all of our phones are dead or at 1%. He ends up in front of us and cornered us in another cul-de-sac just up the street, all while my friend is driving in people's lawns just to get away. Eventually, he followed us all the way home. My friends ran inside to let my mom know what was happening, and I run straight for the car to yell at this guy. He asked me what I yelled out of the car to him, and so I told him exactly what I said and exactly what I called him, expletives and all. He gets even more upset and almost gets out of the car when he sees my mom come out of the house, and now he tries to leave, so I stood behind his truck, yelling the license plate numbers out loud. She makes it to him, and his entire demeanor changes, and now he's acting all innocent, like he was scared. I was told to go inside, and my mom obviously gives him some words of wisdom. She tells me he followed us home because someone ran over his dog a while back because they were speeding through his street, which I don't believe and still gives no excuse to following teenage girls home. So, to the bald man in the red truck, you better hope we don't ever meet again. It was around 7 a.m. and I was on my way to work. I was a little late, but I decided to stop by a gas station. It was only 2 minutes away from work, so I thought, hey, I'm already late. What's another 5 minutes? I was never late, by the way, only once in a blue moon. I pulled up to pump number 1 on my left. The pump next to me was taken by, I think, a Mustang. I'm not too good with cars, so it could have been anything. The owner was finished putting gas in it. I went into the gas station, grabbed some stuff that I needed, and I was at a quarter of a tank of gas and decided to fill up. I paid and walked out, and the car that was there was now gone. On my way to my car, a blue car pulled up taking the same spot. I wasn't paying that much attention to it as I got to my car and put all my stuff down in the passenger seat, but as I did, I got this weird feeling. You know how people say that you can just feel when somebody's staring at you? I believe wholeheartedly now that you can. I had to turn around and face the pump at this point because I obviously had to pump my gas. And when I did, I briefly saw the guy in the driver's seat in that blue car. It doesn't really matter the race or anything, but he was a white, older guy wearing a hat. At first, I didn't see much and I was minding my own business, but we had locked eyes. I began pumping gas and I locked it so that I could go back to my car and mind my own business. And out of my peripheral, I saw it. His hand was moving up and down his lap, his fingers locked around his thing. I really didn't know what to do. I jumped into my car, not wanting to wait outside, and I could see that he was still staring at me hardcore. He wanted me to see him. Once my car was full, I was so petrified to get out and close my cap, but I had to do it, so I did, keeping my eyes straight forward and not towards him at all. I put everything back, literally got in my car and booked it out of the gas station. I kept my eyes on the road and the rearview mirror to make sure that he wasn't following me. Thankfully, he wasn't. I made it to work safe, but it was on my mind all day, and I was blown away. I mean, who does that? Who gets off on someone being uncomfortable? And yeah, I know I should have called the cops or got his license plate, but all I was thinking about was getting the heck out of there. But on my lunch, I went back and I told the employees what happened, and they said that they would look at the cameras. I gave them my info and told them to call if they caught it, but it's been a few days now, and I don't think they're going to be calling. It was nearing Christmas of 2021, and by that, I mean that it was mid-November. I live in the US, so Christmas and holiday items tend to go up in October. Being that I was, at the time, a 16-year-old female, I always tried to get my shopping done early because a lot of my gifts were handmade. For a bit of background, there are a lot of shops, small grocery stores, as well as the local uptown within walking distance of my house. It was at the uptown where this occurred. One of my brothers, Anthony, was really into music and learning different instruments, so I decided to go to the specific store in the uptown that sold music supplies. Because of my schedule, I wasn't able to go until well after 4 p.m., which is when the sun started to set. In hindsight, I shouldn't have tried to go, but I was desperate enough to finish my gift shopping by the first week of December. I stopped at our local Dollar General to get some paint that I had run out of, and then ran across the street to the uptown for Anthony's music supplies. While crossing the street, I saw a large brown truck stopped at the intersection. I hadn't seen a truck of that color in town, or ever, before, so it was pretty noticeable. I also noticed that it was turning into the uptown parking lot. Same as me. One thing about our uptown is that the majority of it is bars and restaurants, so there were quite a lot of people just mingling around some of the bars. It did make me a bit nervous, but the music store was close, so I just decided to tough it out. As I was entering the store, the brown truck slowly crept by me. I was kind of spooked, but I figured whoever it was just being careful of the people around us. The store didn't end up having what I needed, so I placed an order for the following week, and then I left the shop. By now, it was well into dusk. As soon as I left, I saw the truck parked right outside the store. I brushed it off as if they were just in the store next to me, and then I went to leave. As soon as I turned my back, I saw the lights of the truck go on, and the engine roared to life. I basically peed myself right then and there. I turned to look and see who was in the car, but the windows were so heavily tinted that I don't even know how they were able to see out. The car pulls out and slowly creeps towards me, and I'm paralyzed. I figured I was going to be kidnapped and murdered right there on the spot. I found my nerve to run when the car was only 6 feet away, and I booked it down the sidewalk. The car started to go faster and match pace with me, and the people from the bars didn't seem to notice or care. I was crying at this point, and I didn't know what to do. That's when I saw my saving grace. I saw 2 ladies, a little younger than my mom, outside a coffee shop that had just closed. I saw that they spotted me, and I took a chance and ran up to them, and I told them my situation. The pink shirt coffee lady had to leave, but gave the key to the lady in the blue shirt, who offered to let me stay inside the cafe until my mom could come get me. The brown truck drove past a few times and then finally gave up. My mom shows up a few minutes later. I thank the blue coffee lady for her help, and I still go to their shop regularly, during the day. Thank you so much to the pink and blue coffee ladies, because you probably saved my life that day. And to the people driving that brown truck, please, let's never meet again. I was leaving the gym the other afternoon and I was awkwardly exiting behind a middle-aged man. He was pretty well dressed to be exiting a gym. He held the door open for me, but then began keeping pace with me when I headed toward the direction that my car was parked in. He began talking to me, just politely at first, and I realized he had a strong accent, like a European one. And I'm bad with recognition of specific ones, but I just know it was European. Well, he quickly changed the conversation from normal small talk to asking me if I was single. I quickly said no, and I tried to speed up, but he kept pace with me. He seemed upset by this and moved a little closer to my side as we walked through the parking lot together. He said, "Would you leave him for me? You're beautiful. I could take good care of you." I know I made some kind of face because he grinned like he knew that I was now uncomfortable and he was excited by that. "I'm in a happy relationship," I deadpanned, seeing that my car was just 4 more spaced down, and now I'm considering just running for it. There was no one else in the parking lot except us. "Would you give me your number?" He was already taking out his phone as he asked me this. He says, "I'll text you, so you'll have mine in case you change your mind." "No, thank you," I quickly said, "if you'll excuse me," as I continued to speed up. And thankfully, he stopped at the car 1 space before where I was parked. I half jogged to my car, risking a glance back towards him. He was watching me intently, and my gut told me he was waiting to figure out which car was mine. Well, as I unlocked the door, I saw him start speed walking toward me. Sped up by fear, I jumped into my car and I immediately locked the doors. I quickly turned my key and threw my car into reverse as he reached my door. Without even checking to see what was behind me, I hit the gas and I pulled out of the space. I saw him pull his phone back out and seemingly take a picture as I accelerated by him. I was shaking with fear as I pulled out of the parking lot. I had no pepper spray and no weapon on me. I really don't know what he would have done if he'd reached me before I could lock my car. I'm afraid that he got a picture of my license plate or something. Was this a trafficking attempt or just some creep? Either way, I won't be going back to that gym. So, about 5 or 6 days ago, everyone was asleep. I was doing some schoolwork in my room and it was 2:24 a.m. when I heard loud banging knocks on my door. It was so loud. There were 2 loud knocks followed by 2 doorbell rings quickly after. After I heard that, my heart just dropped because this has never happened before and it felt like my soul left my body because we weren't expecting anyone, and it's too late to be coming and knocking so aggressively on the door anyway. After I heard that, I called my parents and they picked up after the 4th call because, well, they were in a deep sleep. And now my parents were up and I told them what I had heard. As soon as they woke up, another 2 knocks and 2 doorbell rings, and this time they heard it, very loud and clearly too. And I verified we had no one coming over at this time. If we did, we would get a call first. And again, 2 minutes after the last knock I heard, we heard it once more with the same pattern. At this time, it was the 3rd time that they had done this. So I was shaking because I was so terrified. I called the police and they said they had police on the way after I explained everything. The operator was saying maybe someone got the wrong house and accidentally knocked on your front door. Then I said even if it was the wrong door, who would knock this loud and ring the bell every 2 or 3 minutes? I ended the call with the operator after they said the police were on the way. As soon as I ended this call, I heard another 2 loud knocks and 2 more doorbell rings. So, guess what? I picked up my phone and I called 911 right back after ending the call, literally just 30 seconds ago, and I told them to tell the police to come fast because I had just heard the knocks again. They said they were on the way already and that they would be there soon. I stayed on the call with the operator this time. After the last round of door knocking and bell ringing, they didn't do it again. The police arrived after 5 minutes and used their flashlights to look at the front of my house. They came and rang my bell, but I was too scared to go down and open the door for the police, so I told the operator I wouldn't go down because I didn't feel safe at my own house at this time. So the police officers continued to look with their flashlights in the front of my house. The operator put me on hold to be with another caller, and she said that she just got a call from the same neighborhood 2 or 3 doors down, stating that they were having the same problems. And the police went to their house too, and they rang the bell and used their flashlights to see the front of the house. They said that they couldn't find anybody and that they would continue to search the streets. They probably made 5 or 6 rounds around the street and said that they couldn't find anything. So we ended the call on that note, and no sounds were heard after that. But we again called about 1 hour later to ask for any updates. They said they still didn't know what happened and didn't find anything and guessed that some kids were probably just ding-dong ditching. But this was just their speculation. I'm still just so scared that somebody was trying to break in. My daughter was about 8 or 9 at the time. We'll call her D for daughter. My mom loved taking her to this local amusement park where we live, and it had rides, rock climbing walls, etc. On this particular day, Dee was climbing all of the walls. She would hit the bell on the first try at the top, climb down, and then go to a more difficult section of the wall. That's when my mom noticed them. A couple in their 30s or 40s whispering to each other and looking at Dee. So my mom told Dee they were going somewhere different and moved to another section of the park. Not more than 5 minutes later, there they were again, staring at Dee and whispering to each other. They left again, only to see the couple again getting closer to Dee. At that point, my mom was becoming paranoid and decided to leave. That's when the couple approached my mom and my daughter. They were trying to talk to Dee, and luckily my mom has an instinct with creepy people and snagged Dee and put her behind her, and this is what she told that couple. She said, "What business do you have talking to an 8-year-old, you weird-ass perverts? You didn't think that I had seen you following us all around the park, staring at my granddaughter and whispering to each other? I'm calling the police." At that point, they left in an absolute hurry. They didn't even give an explanation. Thank you, Mom. Who knows what their intentions were, but I'm glad that we never got to find out, and I'm glad to have such an observant mom in this situation. And yes, she did report it and give descriptions of the people just in case any kids went missing. I, a 28-year-old female, was in my first year as a physical therapist at a large hospital chain. Though I was inside of the hospital, I worked in a small outpatient clinic where patients came to me for appointments and then left. As the newest therapist, I was given the late shift from 9 to 7:30 that catered to those who needed therapy and had to work during the day. We were usually pretty slow in the evening since most of our patients were retired seniors, so I was alone after 5. Like any normal day, I had a new evaluation come in for some shoulder pain. Pretty run of the mill stuff. He was middle aged, good looking, well educated, and very polite. I did the eval and decided to see him twice a week for 6 weeks. I tried to assign him to my assistant, but he refused to be treated by him, stating he would only work with me. That was fine. He wanted later treatment times anyways, and my assistant went home before I did. Our first few weeks of treatments go by. He's so kind, he's very charismatic, and I started to look forward to treating him as we shared a lot of the same interests. He even started waiting for me to lock up and walked me out to my car in the parking garage with me. I hated the parking garage, especially when it was dark, so I actually appreciated him walking out with me. At some point in our treatments, though, I noticed a shift in him. Our light small talk started to turn more flirty. Well, from him, anyways. I was happily married and not flirting back, but as any woman knows, some men can confuse niceness with flirtation. He started making advances and asking me out to drinks after therapy. I politely declined and tried to circle back to talking about his therapy. He seemed agitated and started to become less and less compliant with the exercises. He stopped talking as much as well. I could tell the mood had shifted. This day, I decided it would be best not to have him walk with me to my car. I didn't tell him this at first, so he went out of the clinic and waited by the elevator for me to lock up like he normally does. I wasn't sure what to do, and I couldn't call my partner as they were out of town on business. So, I opened the door from the clinic to the hall where he was, and I told him that I had paperwork to catch up on, and then I'd see him at his next appointment. He looked at me with such anger in his eyes and started walking faster and faster back to the door where I was. Luckily, I was able to close the door and flip the lock before he made it to the door. He pushed the handle, trying to get back in, and realizing that it was locked, he stepped back. Of course, this door is essentially a giant window, and he could see me on the other side, freaking out, but trying my best to conceal it. He told me to let him inside and that he would wait for me while I finished my notes. I said thank you, but I had a lot to do. He insisted, and I declined again. He pushed once again on the door, and when it didn't open quickly, he turned around angrily and went back to the elevator. I was shaking and terrified that he would come back, so I went to the private offices and locked that door as well. I grabbed a large dowel rod that wouldn't do much to him, but sure did make me feel a lot better to have. At this point, I knew I couldn't leave because he knows where I park and what I drive, and he could be waiting for me. I called security for the hospital, and luckily, one of the guards was doing his rounds close by, and he said that he would walk me to my car. We head out to my car, and I see my patient parked a few spots down from me inside his car. When he sees me and the guard, he backs out and pulls away. I thank the guard, and then I get in my car. I drive a few loops before going home to make sure I wasn't being followed, and luckily, I don't think I was. The next day, I go to my boss and I tell her what happened. She accuses me of being paranoid and says that I need to continue to treat him. I ask her about having another therapist stay late with me, and she says she'll ask a few people, but not to get my hopes up as nobody likes working the late shift. I work my normal day, dreading the next day, knowing that that's when I'm scheduled to see him again. That evening, I call my brother and ask him to come to the clinic when this patient was supposed to be here and just wait in the waiting room. Thankfully, he agrees. The next day, it's time for this patient to come in, and nobody is there. This patient was always early to his appointments, so I was very surprised. 15 minutes turns to 30, and he's still not there. I decided that I had waited long enough, so I locked up and I left with my brother. The weekend comes and goes, and by Monday, I'm back at work. I had no messages from this patient about the no-show and had no plans to reach out to him, despite that being the protocol. Lunchtime rolls around and I decide to go to the hospital cafeteria to eat. There are TVs scattered all around and I sit in front of one playing the local news. I occasionally look up at it from my phone and eventually I see a familiar face. It's my patient. He was in handcuffs being walked out of his house. The sound wasn't on, but I read on the ticker that he was being arrested under suspicion of multiple murders. My jaw dropped to the floor. Now, the TV had my full attention as 3 pictures of young, white, blonde women popped up on the screen as his alleged victims. Young, blonde, white women looking very similar to myself. It took me a while to fully grasp what I had just seen. I went to my manager and told her what I saw. Apparently not believing me, she searched his name on Google, and sure enough, there were multiple articles and news clips talking about his arrest. She apologized to me for not listening when I expressed my concerns and told me that I could leave early if I needed to. I stayed for the rest of my shift, but I told her I wouldn't work late anymore by myself. By next shift, I had one of the therapy aides assigned to stay with me until we closed. After a few months, I ended up transferring to a different part of the hospital that had better hours, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened had I gone to get drinks with him, or if I had continued walking to my car with him. I mean, I was only going to see him for a couple more weeks, so what was his plan? Was I his next target? He's still awaiting trial last time I checked, and hopefully will be convicted and locked up far, far away from anyone else. Hey, it's me. If you are a fan of these scary stories or my channel and you haven't subscribed yet, I'd like to take a moment to ask you to consider doing that now. I would greatly appreciate you. Here's more stories. For context, I live with my parents and 2 of my siblings, an older brother and an older sister. It was around 1 a.m. during October, and it was raining. I was sitting in the living room with my sister, just watching a movie. My sister turns to me and asks if I could grab some ice cream from the fridge in our garage. I got up, annoyed, and walked out to our garage. On the other side of the door into our garage is another door that leads to the outside. So as I was getting ice cream, I heard a rustling sound, and I assumed it was something just shifting in the freezer. So I closed the freezer door and started to head back inside. The hairs on the back of my neck suddenly stood up, like that feeling you get when someone is watching you. I whipped my head around to see that the door to the outside was slightly open. In the doorway, I caught a glimpse of a man looking in on me before he ran out of sight. I ran inside and I locked the door behind me, immediately alerting everyone about what had just happened. Who would be outside in the cold rain at 1 a.m? My dad searched the perimeter of our house but didn't find anything. And that's not even the creepiest thing though. My brother was in there 15 minutes before me and swore that he had locked the door. Was that creepy guy in the garage with my brother the whole time and he didn't even know? What was he going to do? I'm glad he ran away, and I hope he never comes back. So, when my mom was about 26, she and my dad owned this blue minivan. She worked at Montana Mike's Steakhouse as a server, and she often worked night shifts, so she'd get out of work at about 9 or 10 p.m. So, one night, she's driving home from work, taking her usual route home, and she glances in her rearview mirror. As she does, she notices the shadow of a body in her trunk. This particular minivan had open, raised trunks, and the trunk was visible from the driver's seat. Well, she heard movement in the trunk, so she glanced back, and sure enough, somebody was back there. So now she's freaking out at this point, but doesn't want to make it seem like she knows. So she just continues driving normally. She got to her parents' house, which is where we were all living at the time, opens the garage door, parks the car in the garage, gets out, locks the minivan. She goes into the house, locks the garage door, and then goes to get my dad. My dad says that he's too tired to worry about anything and that she should just go to bed. So, after a while, and after some quiet, my mom did just that. The next morning, she went to check on the van and found that the passenger side door was open, along with the garage door. What was he doing in my mom's van? What was he hoping to accomplish? Thankfully, he gave up, and we never had to find out. The following story happened when I was around 10 years old. I brought it up to my sister and my mom, who are key witnesses to this occurrence too, by the way, recently, and they were just as shook as I recall being. The three of us were driving home from the grocery store one summer afternoon. We didn't live in a super high or super low-end neighborhood. We were somewhere in the middle, but definitely not a very common area for weirdness or strange sights or anything like that. We were about 2 to 3 blocks away from our house when we began to approach a single vehicle that was parked on a curb with the driver's window rolled down. It was a green SUV, but I'm not sure of the exact make or model. Since it was very light and sunny outside, the three of us easily happened to glance at this car and immediately noticed that something was off about what was inside of it. It had bench seats in both the front and the back, and draped over the middle, there was a person. Their back was completely bent backwards over the seat, and their limbs were crookedly bent at an inhuman angle. Their bare legs were in a jumbled mess, too. If you've seen the original Pet Sematary, I was getting major Zelda vibes. Before I could let out an "oh my gosh, do you guys see this?" the person snapped their neck quickly towards our passing car, glaring at the three of us with huge saucer eyes as their arms began twitching. We let out a collective scream, and then my mom floored it, racing around the corner to the safety of our home. I remember feeling this incomparable dread as I quickly fumbled to help get the groceries inside, slamming the door behind me once we all made it in. A few minutes later, after some nervous laughter and banter, we heard a sound outside. It was like a loud and breaking down car had approached our house, and when we peeked through the blinds, I saw that that was exactly what it was. It was the green SUV, sitting dead center in front of our house with the engine running. I couldn't quite see into the driver's seat, and I was actually glad for that. We shut the blinds and sat in hushed silence while the stranger laid on the horn a couple of times before eventually giving up and chugging back down the street. It may not seem that scary, but at the time, it disturbed me to the core and truly played the biggest part in me deciding not to go outside for a while, at least on my own. It was probably a person coming down from some sort of high, but it was just an incredibly disturbing sight, no matter what happened to be going on. My husband and I were given a home that's been in his family for over 60 years, and it needs a ton of work. We moved into it and live primarily on the lower level for now. We haven't done anything as far as updating the outside yet, so it still looks like an old run-down home. Last year is when this happened. It was late at night as my stepson came in and began to tell me about his day. When we were done talking, I decided to go outside and have a smoke before I went off to bed. At the same time, my stepson said he needed to run to his car and grab something that he had forgotten. I took a step out onto the porch, and as I went to take my second step, I kicked something with the top of my foot. I looked down and I saw a white body stretched through the bottom of the screen door. It looked like a very white body with long arms and very big shoulder joints. It was facing the other way, but I know that it had a head and its one arm was stretched out like it was pulling the rest of itself in. I was so startled that I fell back into the door and almost onto my stepson's feet. He yelled, "What is it? A raccoon or something?" I couldn't say anything except for no. I asked if he saw it, and he said he couldn't see anything outside the door yet since he was behind me. I remember exactly what its skin felt like too. Then about 2 days after that, I bought a flashlight since the house has trees all around it and I wanted to make sure that didn't happen again. I went out and I could feel something was in the distance. Then I started hearing screeching that I've never heard before high up in the trees. I went back inside and locked the doors. After a few more months, I started becoming more comfortable with going out on my porch at night again, but the night before last, I went out and I was watching videos on my phone when I heard something on the roof of the porch. I initially thought it was a raccoon. They're pretty common around here, but I quickly realized that it was a lot heavier than what a raccoon sounded like. I stood up from my chair and I heard a couple of running steps and then something landing on the ground and running off, but I didn't have my big flashlight since I was beginning to feel more comfortable on the porch at night. I started looking online and I'm not sure exactly what it is, so if you have any ideas, please let me know. I come from a dangerous country, so when I moved abroad to a better country in 2016, I had this false sense of security. I used to work in the city as a bartender, but because I was a student and couldn't afford anything in the city, I was renting a room in another suburb. I would usually finish my shift around 2 a.m. I'd catch the bus at 2:30, get to my suburb at around 3, and then walk 10 minutes to my place. There were days, usually on the weekends, when there were people getting off at the same station as me, and there were days where I was all by myself. Honestly, I never felt scared of walking home late because, like I said before, I had this feeling that I was safe. I had survived my home country after all. One day, I got off my bus and I saw a guy standing at the bus stop. He was tall, skinny, and I could tell that he had an Indian background. When I looked at him, he was staring right at me. It was a weird stare, but nothing that initially worried me, since I just thought he was there waiting for his bus. The next day, I got off my bus only to realize that he was there again, and again, and again. At this point, I was starting to feel a bit uncomfortable. I could now tell that he wasn't there to catch a bus. One night, I got off the bus and no one got off with me. It was one of those days where I had got off all by myself. That normally wouldn't be a problem, but because this same guy was there, I felt uncomfortable. I started walking home, but that night was different. I noticed that he wasn't heading in the direction that he usually goes. He was following me. As soon as I realized this, I started walking a bit faster, but not too much because I didn't want to show him that I was scared. And as I did, I noticed he started walking a bit faster too. I thought he was following me, but I couldn't believe something like that might have actually been happening. I decided I was going to run for it as fast as I could. As soon as I could, I turned down the corner and I ran. When I looked back after a few seconds, I saw that he had also turned the same corner and was running too. So, in that moment, I was 100% sure that he was now following me. I managed to reach my building and began searching for my keys. It was so hard to get to them because my hands were shaking. I could see him coming, and he was getting so close to me. I finally opened the door, and I don't think I'll ever forget when I closed the glass door on his face. He got so close to reaching me, and he had a smirk on his face too. Honestly, I have no idea what could have happened. Maybe he just wanted to talk to me, or maybe he was dangerous. I'm just grateful that I'll never have to know. After that, it was really hard for me to leave the apartment, even in daylight, because he now knew where I lived. I started catching an Uber home and I moved out a few months later. I also quit working night shifts. I never saw him again, and I hope that I never do. This was around 2007. I was in college, and for those that are interested, the school is located in the mountains of western North Carolina. I'm a female and was 22 at the time. My two girlfriends and I were super stoned and decided to walk to the nearest convenience store for cigarettes. This was around 9:30 at night in October or November. Anyways, to get there, we had to walk down a long stretch of poorly lit road, and at that age, you think you're invincible, right? So, a few minutes into the walk, my mom called, as she does every night, and I was talking to her while my friends walked a little bit ahead, lost in their own conversation. Suddenly, I became aware of a man walking in our direction from several yards away. There was nothing specific about him that creeped me out, but for some reason, every sense was tuned into him, and I became hyper-focused. I was so focused on him that I realized I couldn't hear my mom anymore, and my responses were nonsense. The hairs on my neck were standing up, and it felt like every fiber of my being was just screaming, "Danger, danger." I managed to stammer out to my mom that I had to call her back, and I just hung up in the middle of whatever she was saying. As the distance between us closed, I noticed my friends had gone completely silent. The tension in our little group was palpable. Then, as our paths began to merge, he stepped into the empty road under one of the few streetlights. He walked around us in a broad circle. He had long, stringy blonde hair, and he was tall and thin. He had a creepy grin on his face and was hunched over slightly. He faces us the entire time, and as we passed, he said in a low, slow, unsettling tone, "Good evening, ladies." When he reached the sidewalk again, he continued walking backwards, facing us, and finally howled out, "Good night." We were all rigid and bunched together by then, and when we reached the convenience store, all of us were physically trembling. Without ever having said a word to one another, each one of us had experienced the same physical response to seeing this man. Instant fear, hair standing on end, all senses geared toward him, watching and listening and focusing with every ounce of energy. We didn't even speak to one another until we arrived at the convenience store, and then we discussed the situation. We were shocked to realize all of us had experienced the same feelings of abject terror before he ever got anywhere near us. We got what we came for, and I called my mom back. By this point, we were all stone cold sober. I mean, who knew that fear could kill a buzz so fast, right? One of my girlfriends told us about a house party just down the street. We decided to go there and hang out for an hour or so just to be safe and avoid encountering this man again on the way home. Even now, it still amazes me and gives me the creeps that each of us separately had the same visceral reaction to this man for no apparent reason. We likened his behavior to that of a predatory animal, and to this day, I believe if any of us had been alone that night, this story would have ended differently. Now that I'm home and safe, I'm beginning to process what just happened, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to sleep or not. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I had some friends from out of state come into town for the weekend, and we decided to go downtown for drinks. I drove separately because they were coming from an Airbnb. Around 2 a.m., we decided to leave, and my car was parked in a garage a block over from where my friends parked. I say my goodbyes and begin the short walk to the garage. As soon as I hit the corner, two large men begin walking behind me. I try to subtly put space between us, and they suddenly whistle loudly and shout, but I don't see anybody ahead of me. I don't acknowledge, but I do start walking faster. I pass an alley to my left, and there's another guy walking out of it towards me. At this point, I'm no longer subtly walking fast. I make it into the garage, and I parked by the entrance, so I quickly slip into my car and I lock the doors. I turn around to look behind me, and I see the guys that were following me stop at the entrance of the garage and just watch my car. They talk for a minute before they spread out and stand across the entrance, blocking my exit. I don't move. I keep watching until other vehicles start coming in, forcing them to move. I take the opportunity to quickly pull out and floor it out of there. I could just be paranoid, but my instincts were telling me that something was up as soon as I saw them initially, and now I can't sleep. This writer did include an edit to include that she did report it to the police the next day. Good for her. I was in a toxic, borderline abusive friendship with a girl from the ages of 9 to 12. Here's some background information to give you a little understanding as to what my life was like back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. I grew up in a very tumultuous household. My parents hated each other, and my extended family, along with my immediate, were plagued by mental illness and drug addiction. So, needless to say, I was a very anxious child who was drawn to unstable people, and suffice it to say, they were drawn to me. I was a shy 11-year-old girl who, like many others before me, used the internet as a way to vent my frustrations and my anger about my home life. This was the time where AOL was the main source of communication between friends. And I was no stranger to this along with MySpace and Facebook. However, I wasn't like the typical preteens of this era, or so I thought. I kept my profiles private. I never accepted a follow or a friend request that I didn't know, and never shared my location on these said profiles. This is the part where I introduce Tanya. Tanya isn't her real name, of course. I don't want to use her real name just in case she happens to read this thread or watches the YouTube channel or listens to the podcast. So we'll just call her Tanya. Tanya and I met in elementary school, one of the points in my life where my family situation was quite volatile, and in retrospect, I think that she sensed this. I was vulnerable, and Tanya took advantage of my innocence. She never really displayed any signs of her true intentions in the beginning, as they never usually do. She would do shady things every now and again, like manipulate me into begging my mom to stay on the computer until the wee hours of the morning so we could go on not-safe-for-work websites, or ghost me when I didn't give her my favorite pen, or even yell at me when I couldn't nail a guitar solo on Guitar Hero. She did some other things to me that I believe my brain blocked out due to trauma. My mom didn't like her very much either. Parents always have a weird intuition when it comes to friends, and I wish to God that I would have listened to my mom before Tanya did what she did to me. Tanya's behavior changed for the worse when we turned 11. Tanya was openly jealous of my success in school. Granted, she was incredibly smart herself, but she always made it a point to mock me for having great grades, and would always comment that since I wasn't pretty enough, having good grades would be a nice balance. Nice, right? Well, it took me a while to build my self-esteem up after all of the snide remarks that she would make about my weight and my face, and now, only as a 22-year-old, I do think that I'm beautiful, and I have a wonderful figure. Anyways, back to Tanya. As a result of her jealousy and growing resentment towards me, she began to plot my downfall. And I'm not exaggerating either. This girl literally tried to ruin my self-worth even more than she already had. It started in the 6th grade. Tanya and I were remarkably close that year, and I wanted to do everything with her. We would talk all day in school, and we would chat all night on AIM. On one particular evening, Tanya and I were talking about boys. Being that we were hormonal preteens, our conversations would usually turn into who we liked in school that day. Being that I had a horrible relationship with my father, I didn't really trust boys, even from an early age, so it was rare if I developed a crush on one. I remember Tanya and I's conversation going a little something like this. She says, "Do you know Mark?" I say, "The kid in my class? Yeah. Why?" She says, "I heard he likes you." I said, "What? No way." She says, "Totally. He told me. You want me to talk to him and give him your username?" I said, "Yes, of course. Oh my God, thank you, Tanya." My heart starts racing. A boy actually likes me? Impossible. When Tanya told me that she would give Mark my username for AIM, I nearly exploded in my seat. 11-year-old me couldn't believe I was going to have my first real boyfriend. How wrong I was. Fast forward to the next night, I was getting ready for bed when I heard the famous AOL ding sound off on my iPod Touch. You know the sound I'm talking about. When I checked the notification, it was a message from MarkyBoy99. I don't remember his username, so we'll just go with something like that. I turned red. Tanya had really talked to Mark and gave him my username. She was truly the best. He messaged me with the usual, "Hey," emphasis on the 3 Ys, and I responded, "Hey." I didn't want to come off as desperate, so I only used 1 Y. Not even 1 minute later, he messaged me back. We talked all night about everything, our days, how school was, what type of silly bands we liked, typical 11-year-old stuff. I have to admit, I was smitten right off the bat. I think it was partly because I never really had a boy like me before, and the other part being that my self-esteem was so low that I never thought a boy would be capable of liking me. Also, it could have been because Mark was one of the most popular boys in school at that time. He played football, was mouthy to the teachers, and was extremely outgoing. All the things a young girl would be attracted to. We talked for months, my puppy love growing for him more and more every time we chatted. Of course, I never spoke to him on the phone, nor did I ever get his phone number, because why would you do that, right? All the while I was speaking to him, Tanya would be gassing me up, telling me how proud she was of me and that I deserved a boyfriend. My suspicions of Mark only began to grow when I attempted to approach him during school hours. Again, I had anxiety, so I would never really speak to Mark outside of AIM. When I went to talk to him, Mark looked confused, as if he's never had a conversation with me before in his life. He turned away from me on the playground and walked to be with his other friends. Weird. This wasn't like him. He was usually so chatty with me online that I expected him to welcome me with open arms in person. My ego was bruised. My little 11-year-old mind tried to rationalize this behavior by chalking it up to him not wanting to talk to the nerd since he was so popular and he just preferred to keep our relationship online. I told Tanya the news and she seemed to be genuinely heartbroken for me. She was just as angry as I was and vowed to confront Mark later that day during music class. This made me happy. Tanya had my back, and as far as I knew, she was going to tell Mark off about him being a total jerk to me. Well, it worked. Later that night, I got a message from Mark telling me how sorry he was for ignoring me and that he was just going through some family things. Back in love, I was. I didn't care that Mark ignored me during school. I didn't care that he rejected my advances in person. As long as I had him to talk to online and Tanya's support, I was fine. I even told my mom about him, and she was extremely happy for me as well. Another month passed, and it was now March 31st, 2011. Mark messaged me and told me that he had something very important to tell me the next day. The anxiety begins again. What was it? What did he have to tell me? At that point, I considered myself and Mark to be dating, so I was anxious that he was either going to break it off with me or he was going to make us public in school the next day. I told my mom and Tanya, almost on the verge of tears with how excited and nervous I was. Well, the next day, April 1st, 2011, rolled around and this is what followed. It was around 7 p.m. and I was on Club Penguin, as I usually was, until I heard a familiar ding. It was Mark. It was time for the news I'd been waiting for all day. Mark says, "Hey, babe," with a winky face. I said, "Oh my gosh, hey," with two Y's this time. "I've been waiting for you to chat me all night." Mark says, "Sorry, babe, I was at practice," frowny face. "Are you ready for the news?" I was shaking with anticipation at this point. Even writing this now, a whole swell of emotions are resurfacing. I say, "Yes, of course." It was then that Mark sent me a picture. I opened it, but only it wasn't Mark. It was Tanya, and she was holding a handwritten sign that said, "Happy April Fool's Day." At first, I started laughing, and I mean it was an ugly laugh. Of course it was a prank. Tanya had gotten me good, right? Right? Well, wrong. It was then when the realization hit me that I started to sob. I felt betrayed and I felt like a loser. Tanya had been behind Mark all along and she had been planning this big joke since October of 2010. She had been so jealous that she pretended to be someone else and string along my emotions when she knew I was already in a rough place mentally. She told me I was stupid to even think that Mark would even like me in the first place and that I was dumb for not asking for his number. Tanya had been at this for 6 months. An 11-year-old girl plotted Mark, used him to make me think that a boy liked me, and tricked me into believing that I had a boyfriend, all while telling me when we hung out that she was happy for me and that Mark and I were a cute couple. I told my mom, who then called Tanya's mom. My mother was livid, to say the least. She told Tanya's mom to tell her daughter never to speak to me again. I was crushed. My best friend of 3 years had catfished me simply because she wanted to play a joke. I was loyal to her, and she toyed with my emotions because she could. Tanya had tried multiple times to guilt-trip me into being her friend again in the months that followed, leading into 7th grade. One of the more memorable and honestly messed up times being when she messaged me a few days after my birthday in August to tell me that her mother had just died in a horrible car crash. Her body was dismembered and they could only find her head and wedding ring. As anyone would be, I was in tears. Tanya's mother was nothing but lovely to me, and learning that she died in such a violent way crushed my soul. I started talking to Tanya again, asking her when her mother's funeral would be. Tanya then revealed to me, seconds later after speaking to her about the grisly details over her mother's passing, that she was just kidding and was pranking me again, and that I was stupid to still believe her. She even sent a video of her laughing at me. I was disgusted. Who would even say something like that? What 12-year-old would message someone that their mother was dismembered in a car crash? She then revealed her ugly and, quite frankly, evil intentions when we were at the beginning of 7th grade, and she became friends with a girl named Kaylee. They both invited me to sit with them at their lunch table, and because I was desperate for friends, I stupidly accepted, only to be met with hordes of insults and laughter behind my back every chance that I wasn't looking. Tanya then messaged me one night, telling me that I should just off myself and the world would be a much better place without me in it. She had Kaylee tell me to go jump off a bridge. Tanya told me that she hated me and was never really my friend to begin with, that I deserved all of the pain that she put me through the year prior. I again told my mom, who then called the police. She had had enough of Tanya, and so had I. For 4 years, I had to put up with Tanya's malicious behavior, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. My mom made me delete my AIM account, and Tanya's mom told her to never contact me again, or else. My mom also advised me to move lunch tables, but I was hell-bent on not letting Tanya win. For the entirety of 7th grade, I sat at the same table as Tanya, only I spoke to my friends at the other side of the table. I never spoke to her, looked at her, or gave her any sort of attention. Kaylee was scared to death of me afterward too, as the police had gotten in contact with her family as well. It's been 10 years, and I still haven't spoken to Tanya. I am now 22 years old, have 2 bachelor's degrees, one in psychology and the other in history, and I am now working towards my master's in clinical social work. Tanya did do other things to me too that I could write a whole nother story about, but I think writing this one helped me give closure on the part of my childhood that scarred me for years. I thank God for my mom stepping in when she did, because I don't know where I'd be without her. As for Tanya, I don't know where she is or what she's doing, and I'd really rather not. On the off chance that she stumbles upon this story, I have a message for her. Your jealousy and wishes for death upon me did not win, and I truly hope that karma does not come around one day to bite you in the ass. Tanya, let's never meet again. So, back in 2017, my girlfriend and I were in a semi-long-distance relationship. I lived in the Orlando area, and she lived in Tampa. I would frequently travel via megabus to Tampa to see her for concerts. Shortly after this experience, I switched exclusively to Amtrak, and I didn't regret having to pay a bit more. On this day, however, I had picked up Wendy's before the trip for dinner and made my way to the boarding area. I noticed a disheveled older man glaring at me, openly. I didn't acknowledge him and instead boarded the bus. I sat near the back door of the bus, placed my lone backpack on the seat next to me, and opened my food. As I was eating, I noticed that the same man who'd been glaring had boarded and sat across the aisle from me, in the seat closest to the aisle, same as me. We had about 2 feet of separation. Well, the bus takes off and we're soon on the interstate, headed west. Every time I take a bite of my food, he would grumble. Then he started raising his voice a bit and motioning to me. Then he started near shouting and pointing at my wrapper. I had my headphones in and I was comfortably ignoring him by this point. I had worked a full shift that day, had headed home, showered, changed, grabbed and packed my bag and headed out, so I was tired and hungry. As I finished my food, I balled up the wrappers and tossed them back into the bag, and he became irate, shrieking in Spanish, and he reached over to me, grabbing the bag and looking inside. When he saw it was empty, he began screaming at me, and I bluntly told him to shut the frick up. It was my food. He went silent for a bit until I saw him rummaging in his bag. He then slipped a hatchet out of the bag, laid it across his lap, and smirked at me. My blood ran cold. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", 300 pounds, but in that small of a space and dealing with a weapon-wielding maniac, I knew I couldn't do anything. I immediately stood up, I walked to the driver, and I told him what had happened. The next stop was Lakeland, and we were still about 45 minutes away, which was the only way he could do something. I went back to my seat, I grabbed my backpack, and fled to the upper level, sitting close to the window at the far back. When we got to Lakeland, I saw him get approached and then escorted off the bus. As he stepped off, he stumbled and fell, which is when I realized he was also drunk as a skunk. I'm glad that he didn't get the opportunity to hurt anyone on that bus, and I can only hope he was detained after or separated from his weapon. This happened yesterday, and the more I think about it, the more it freaks me out. I live in the biggest city in my state, and this was when I was walking home from the convenience store. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I made the choice to walk to the local store to get some cleaning supplies around dusk, anticipating that I would get back around 10 minutes after the sun set for the night for good. As I was walking home, a man stops me on the street and he asks me, "Miss, do you know where this street is?" As a general rule of thumb, I try to avoid giving directions to men when I'm alone in case it means they have to walk in the same direction as me. So I said, "No, sorry," and I continued walking. He calls after me and he says, "Hey, well, what about this other location in my city?" I'm being vague in my story. I hope you understand. He adds that he's new in town and that he could really use some help. But here's where it starts going wrong. I let it show on my face that I knew where he was meant to be going, and he took 3 steps towards me and asked again. I was kind of freaked out, so I said, "That street is on the opposite direction, and they close in 10 minutes. He chuckles and says, "I know, I gotta hustle, I guess. I'll walk with you." That statement threw me off because if you don't know anything about the store, how do you know either of these things? We walk for about 10 minutes while he asks me questions about my relationship status, what I do for work. I do have a non-traditional source of income, and he asks me what kind of drugs I do. We then stop on the corner of my street. He tells me he lives on this corner building and that he's willing to give me some smack for free, and he wanted to pay for a monthly subscription to my services. He invites me inside no less than 15 times, repeating, "Miss, stop acting scared. I'm not a murderer or a rapist, so there's nothing to worry about." I told him I'd be waiting outside, scared to leave in case he saw which direction I walked to get to my house. He kept telling me, "There are cameras right there. Nothing's gonna happen if you come in." He continues to tell me that I'm not a rapist, I just think you're gorgeous, and even tries to grab my arm to start pulling me into his building. I told him that I would get his number and text him before walking home, 15 minutes longer because I took a detour in case he followed me. I don't know what he wanted from me for real, but I'm glad I wasn't naive enough to find out.